Chapter 19 of The Joss, a Reversion. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Narrated by Christopher Walters. The Joss, a Reversion, by Richard Marsh. Chapter 19, The Reticence of Captain Lander. The office door was ajar. I remembered that I had left it so when I came to bed. Through the opening, a dim light was visible. I peeped in. I had expected to find that my guest would take the shape of the individual who had dodged my footsteps home from Camford Street. I hardly know on what I based my expectation, but there it was. A single glance, however, was sufficient to show that guest should read guests, for there were three. One was the pock-marked gentleman in question. A second was seemingly his brother. They were as alike as two peas. The third was as remarkable a person as I had ever yet beheld. He was of uncommon height and uncommon thinness. I never saw a smaller head set on human shoulders. My impression was that it was a monstrously attenuated monkey which had thrown a yellow dust sheet about it anyhow. And it was only when I perceived the deftness with which the contents of my drawers were being emptied out upon the table that it occurred to me that, man or monkey, it was advisable that I should interfere. Just as I had decided that it was about time for me to have a finger in the pie, my beady-eyed acquaintance of the afternoon lighted on the God of Fortune, which I had tossed upon the table on my return from Prior's. Snatching it up with a curious cry, he handed it to his monkey-headed friend. That long-drawn-out gentleman, after a rapid glance at it, held it up with both hands high above his head. At once his two associates threw themselves down flat on their faces, grovelling before the penny doll as if it had been an object too sacred for ordinary eyes to look upon. The man of length without breadth began to say something in a high-pitched monotone, which was in a language quite unknown to me, but which sounded as if it were a prayer or invocation. He spoke rapidly, as if he were repeating a form of words which he knew by heart. I was getting interested. It seemed that I was surreptitiously assisting at some sort of religious service in which the doll played a conspicuous part. As I was momentarily expecting something to happen, something in the Arabian Nights way, as it were, that stupid hockey stick, slipping somehow from my grasp, fell with a bang upon the floor. That concluded the service on the spot. It must needs strike against the door in falling, driving it further open, so that I stood revealed to the trio in plain sight. My impression is that they took me for something of horror, a demoniacal visitation, for all I know. My costume was weird, enough to astonish even the Occidental mind. Anyhow, no sooner did they get a glimpse at me than they stood not in the order of their going, but went at once. Out went the light, and also out went they, through the window by which they had entered, and that with a show of agility which did them credit. I caught up that wretched stick, rushed after them into the darkness, and had the satisfaction of giving someone a pretty smart crack upon the head as he dropped from the sill onto the pavement below. I am not sure, but I fancy it was the lengthy one. Striking a light, I looked to see what damage had been done. So far as I could discover, the only thing which was missing was the God of Fortune, to which they were entirely welcome. Apparently they prized it more than I did. I had a kind of notion, born of I know not what, that they had been after the batter's papers. If so, they were disappointed, for I had taken them with me into my bedroom, and at that moment they were reposing on a chair by my bedside. The greater part of the following day I spent in searching for someone who knew something about Benjamin Batters, or Great Ka Island, or Arthur Leonard, missionary, without result. I learned what I was already aware of, that there were numerous missionary societies, both in England and America, and acquired the additional information that to try to find out something about a particular missionary without knowing by which society he had been accredited resembled the well-known leading case of the search for the needle in the haystack. At the great shipping office at which I made inquiries, no one knew anyone who had ever been to Great Ka Island or ever wanted to go. And as for Benjamin Batters, the general impression seemed to be that if I wanted to know anything about him, I had better put an advertisement in the agony column and see what came of that. Altogether, I felt that the day had been pretty well wasted. But as it would have been wasted anyhow, I had the consolation of knowing that there had not been so much harm done after all. To the credit side of the account was the fact that I had picked up 3 or 4 odds and ends of curious information which had never come my way before. And as luck would have it, shortly after my return I actually had a client, or something like one at any rate. Crumper was making ready for departure when he appeared at the door with a face on which was an unmistakable grievance. "Gentleman wishes to see you, sir. Told him that the office was just closing. Did you? But don't be so liberal with information of the kind. Show the gentleman in. Crumper showed him in. When I saw him, I was not sure that, in the colloquial sense, he was a gentleman. And yet I did not know. He was a tall, well-set-up man of between 30 and 40, distinctly good-looking, with fair hair and beard, and a pair of the bluest eyes I ever saw. He wore a blue serge suit, a turned-down collar, and a scarlet tie. I know something of the sea and of sailors, having several of the latter among my closest friends. If he was not a sailor, I was no judge of the breed. He brought a whiff of sea air into the room. I motioned him to a chair, on which he placed himself as if he was not altogether at his ease. He glanced at a piece of paper which he had in his hand. "You are Mr. Frank Payne?" I inclined my head. "A lawyer?" I nodded again. He pulled at his beard, observing me with his keen blue eyes, as if he was thinking that for a lawyer I was rather young. "I want a lawyer, or rather I want advice, which I suppose only a lawyer can give me. I was speaking about it to George Gardner, and he mentioned your name." "I am obliged to George. He is my very good friend. To whom have I the pleasure of speaking?" "I am Max Lander." "I am pleased to make your acquaintance, as I should any friend of Mr. Gardner's. You, like him, are connected with the sea."
"How did you find that out? Do I look as if I were?"
"Perhaps only to the instructed eye. I wondered who, with ordinary perception, could associate him with anything else. I am so fortunate as to have many friends among sailors, therefore I am always on the lookout for one."
"That's so."
He kept trifling with his beard, apparently desirous that the burden of the conversation should rest with me. "You know Mr. Gardner well?"
"Not over well."
"He was my schoolfellow with another man who is now also a sailor, another George Kingdon."
"What name?"
"Kingdon. He has lately received his first command of a ship named the Flying Scud." Mr. Lander ceased to play with his beard. His hands dropped onto his knees. He sat forward on his chair, staring at me as if I were some strange animal.
"Good Lord!"
He seemed agitated. I had no notion why. Something I had said had apparently disturbed him. "You know Mr. Kingdon?"
"Kingdon? Kingdon, is that his name? Then devil take him. No, I don't mean that. Perhaps it's not his fault after all. It's the fortune of war. Still, devil take him all the same."
"What has Mr. Kingdon done to you, Mr. Lander?"
"Done? Done!"
Apparently his feelings were too strong for words. Rising from his seat, he began to stride about the room. Then, resting both hands upon the table, he glared at me. "What has Mr. Kingman done to me? Did you hear my name?" "I understood you to say it was Lander."
"That's it, Lander. Max Lander. Now don't you know who I am?"
"It may be my stupidity, but I have not the least idea."
"Do you mean to say that you don't know George Kingdon's taken my ship from me?"
"Taken from you? I don't understand. I understood that the Flying Scud was the property of Messrs.
Staple, Wainwright, and Frisco. That's so. That's the name and title of the firm. They're the owners.
But I was in command for the last 3 voyages, and when I brought her home I was hoping it was for the last time." "It seems that your hope was justified."
"Are you laughing at me, Mr. Payne?"
"Because if you are, take my tip and don't."
"I don't mind being laughed at in a general way, but this is a subject on which I bar so much as a smile. I'm too sore, sir, too sore. Do you know the circumstances under which I got chucked from the Flying Scud?"
"I do not. May I ask if that is the matter on which you are seeking my advice?"
"Well," he began,
pulling at his beard again, hesitating as if fearing to say too much.
"What I want to know is, are your sympathies with the owner, with Kingdon, or with me?"
"Since I know nothing of what you are referring to, what answer do you expect me to give? So far as I am concerned, you are talking in riddles."
"Look here, Mr. Payne, I'll make a clean breast of the whole thing. Gardner told me you are a decent sort, so I'll take his word for it. You see before you the best man in London, in England, in the world, for all I know, done all around. I knew I was taking a certain risk, but I didn't know it was a risk in that particular direction, and that's where I was had. I saw my way to a real big thing. I went for it, shoved on all steam, brought the ship home, pretty well empty as she was, then got diddled. So when I laid the ship alongside and the owners found that there was scarcely enough on board to pay expenses, they didn't like it. I got my marching ticket,
and Mr. George Kingdon was in command instead. If it hadn't been that I'd got a little money of my own, I should have been on my beam ends before now. Do I gather that you complain of the way in which the owners of the Flying Scud have treated you?
Not a bit. Nothing of the kind. The only person I complain of is, we'll say, a party. If I got that, we'll say, party, alone in a nice quiet little spot for about 10 minutes, after that time I wouldn't complain of him. The complaint would be on the other foot. Then do you wish me to assist you in the scheme of assault and battery? I don't want that either. The fact is, it's a queer story. You wouldn't believe me if I told it. No one has done yet, so I'm not going to try my luck again with you. What I want to know is this. Suppose I ship. We'll say a man, and that, we'll say, man undertakes to hand over certain, articles to pay for passage and deposits certain other articles by way of earnest money. Before the ship reaches port, that, we'll say, man vanishes into air. The articles which were to have been handed over vanish with him, and the deposit likewise. What offence has that, we'll say, man been guilty of against the English law? Your point is a knotty one. Where was the deposit? In a locker in my cabin.
Secured by lock and key?
Secured by lock and key. And the key was in my pocket.
How was it taken out?
That's what I want to know.
You are sure it was taken out?
Dead sure.
If you have evidence which will show that the person to whom you refer made free with the contents of your locker, then I should say that it was a case of felony. But there may be other points which would have to be considered. I should have to be placed in possession of all the facts of the case before I could pronounce an opinion. The matter may not be so simple as you think.
Simple? I think it's simple, good Lord.
He held up his hands, as if amazed at the suggestion.
That's another thing I want to know.
Suppose, on the strength of that, we'll say man's promises, I make promises on my own account to certain members of the crew.
Being done by that, we'll say, man, I was obliged to do them. What is my position, Mr. Payne, towards those members of my crew?
That is a question to which I cannot reply offhand. It would depend on so many circumstances. I am afraid you will have to tell me the whole of your story before I can be of use to you.
Ha! Is that so? I was afraid it would be. I said to myself that you can't expect a man, a lawyer or no lawyer, to see what's inside a box unless you open the lid. But I can't tell you the story. I can't. I'm too sore, sir, too sore. Smarting almost more than I can bear. I've been done out of a fortune, one of my good name, and out of something I value more than both. That's a fact. I'll look round a bit more and try to get one of them back in my own way. Then if I can't, perhaps I'll come to you again. Sorry to have troubled you, Mr. Payne. What's your fee?
For what? I've been of no use to you. For a pleasant conversation with my friend's friend, I charge no fee for that, Mr. Lander.
You're a lawyer. A lawyer's time is money. I've always understood that a lawyer's fee is 6 and 8p. You've found me pretty trying, so I'll make it £1 if you don't mind.
He laid a sovereign on the table. Without another word, he left the room. I did not try to stop him. To my thinking, the whole interview had verged perilously near to the ridiculous. I took the coin and locked it in a drawer, proposing, with Gardner's assistance, to hunt up Mr. Lander again. His money should be restored to him, if not in one form, then in another. I would dine the man and make him tell his funny tale. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of The Joss, a Reversion. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Narrated by Christopher Walters. The Joss, a Reversion, by Richard Marsh. Chapter 20. My Client and Her Friend. The next day I was engaged. On that following, I went up to Fenchurch Street, to the offices of Messrs. Staple, Wainwright, and Frisco. I had ascertained that Gardner was out of town, and actuated by motives of curiosity, thought I would learn where Mr. Lander might be found. As I was going up the steps, an old gentleman came down. I knew him pretty well. His name was Curtis. He had been, and indeed, for all I knew, was still, an agent of Lloyd's. For 2 or 3 years we had not met, After we had exchanged greetings, I put to him my question. "Do you know a man named Lander, Max Lander?"
"Late of the Flying Scud?"
An odd expression came on his face, as it were the suggestion of a grin. "That's the man."
"Yes, I know something of Max Lander, Captain Max, as he likes to be called, though there's not much of the captain about him just at present."
The grin came more to the front. "He called on me about a matter of which I could make neither head nor tail. I should like to have another talk with him. Can you tell me where he's to be found?" Mr. Curtis shook his head.
"Just now he's resting. It's been a little too hot for him of late. I fancy he's lying by till it gets a little cooler."
"What's wrong with the man?"
"Nothing exactly wrong, only he's had a little experience. Sorry I can't stay. This cab's waiting for me."
He stepped into the hansom, which was drawn up by the curb.
"If you want to know what's wrong with Lander, you mention to him the name of Batters. Benjamin Batters."
The cab drove off. Before I had recovered from my astonishment, it was beyond recall. Batters? Benjamin Batters? My Benjamin Batters? There could hardly be two persons possessed of that alliterative name. If I had only guessed that there was any sort of connection between him and Benjamin Batters, Mr. Lander would not have departed till we had arrived at a better understanding. Why had the idiot not dropped a hint? Why had Curtis driven off at that rate at the wrong moment? I asked at the office for the address of Captain Max Lander. I was snubbed. The name was evidently not a popular one in that establishment. The clerk, having submitted my inquiry to someone elsewhere, informed me curtly that nothing was known of such a person there, and appeared to think that I had been guilty of an impertinence in supposing that anything was. When I followed with a request for information about a Mr. Benjamin Batters, I believe that clerk thought I was having a game with him. Somewhere in the question must have been a sting with which I was unacquainted, for, with a scowl, he turned his back on me, not deigning to reply. As I did not want to have an argument with Messrs. Staple, Wainwright, and Friscoe's staff, I went away. I pursued my inquiries elsewhere, both for Captain Max Lander and for Mr. Benjamin Batters, but without success. The scent had run to ground. By the evening I concluded that I had had about enough of the job. Instead of trying to find out things about Benjamin Batters, I would seek out Mary Blythe. She should have the news. I was not sure that I had not already kept them from her longer than I was justified in doing. She should learn that she was the proud possessor of a tumble-down, disreputable house in Camford Street, though, so far as I could see, she had not a shadow of a title to it which would hold good in law, but perhaps she was not a person who would allow herself to be hampered by a trifle of that description. Also of a comfortable income derived from consols, conditions being attached to both bequests which were calculated to drive her mad. Having imparted that good news, I would wash my hands of the Batters family for good and all. There was something about it which was, as Gregory Pryor put it, sniffy. With that design I started betimes the next morning. I had no difficulty in finding the establishment of Messrs. Cardew and Slaughter, where Mr. Batters stated in his will that he had last heard of his niece as an assistant. It was an emporium, where they sold many things you wanted, and more which you did not, from gloves to fire-irons. After being kept waiting an unconscionable length of time, asked many uncalled-for questions, and enduring what I felt to be intentional indignities, I was ushered into the office of Mr. Slaughter. That gentleman was disposed to mete out to me even more high-handed treatment than Messrs. Staple, Wainwright, and Friscoe. Under the circumstances, however, that was more than I was inclined to submit to. He seemed to regard it as sheer insolence that a stranger should venture to speak to him, the great Slaughter, of such a mere nothing as one of his assistants. As if I wanted to! We had quite a passage of arms. In the midst who should come running in but the girl herself, Mary Blythe. She had just been dismissed. I had come in the nick of time to prevent her being thrown, literally thrown, into the street. That was a partial explanation of Mr. Slaughter's haughtiness. Pretty badly she seemed to have been used, and very hot she was with a sense of injury. She had a companion in misfortune, a prettier girl I had never seen. The pair had been sent packing at a moment's notice. If I had been a minute or two later I should have missed them. They would have gone, in which case the most striking chapter in my life's history might have had to be written in a very different fashion. When it came to paying the two girls the wretched pittance which was due to them as wages, an attempt was made to keep back the larger portion of it under the guise of fines, that rascally system by means of which so many drapers impose upon the helpless men and women they employ. A few sharp words from me were sufficient to show that this was an occasion on which that method of roguery could hardly be safely practised. I judged that the sum paid them, 15 shillings, represented their entire fortune. With that capital they were going to go out to face the world. In the cab I had an opportunity of forming some idea of what my client was like. Mary Blythe was big, raw-boned, and, I may add, hungry-looking. She gave me the impression that she had had a hard life, one in which she had had not seldom to go without enough to eat. In age I set her about 26 or 7. She was not handsome. On the other hand, she was not repellent. Her feature was homely, but they were not unpleasing, and there was about them more than a suggestion of honesty and shrewdness. Her experience of the rougher side of life had probably given her a readiness of wit, and a coolness of head, which would cause her to find herself but little at a loss in any position in which a changeable fate would place her. That was how she struck me. I liked her clear eyes, her pleasant mouth, her determined nose and chin. Intellectuality might not be her strongest point. Obviously, in a scholastic sense, her educational advantages had been but small. Her tongue betrayed her. But, unless I greatly erred, she was a woman of character for all that. Strong, enduring, clear-sighted within her limits, sure and by no means slow. A little prone to impatience, perhaps. It is a common failing. I am impatient myself at times. Still, on the whole, on her own lines, a good type of an Englishwoman. My client's appearance pleased me better than I feared would have been the case. I was not so eager to wash my hands of the Batters connection as I had been. But it was my client's friend who appealed most strongly to my imagination. She took my faculties by storm. I am not easily disconcerted, yet in her presence I felt ridiculously at ease. She was only a girl. I kept telling myself that she was only a girl. I believe that it was because she was only a girl that I was conscious of such curious sensations. She sat opposite me in the cab. Every time her knee brushed against mine I felt as if I was turning pink and green and yellow. It was not only uncomfortable, it was undignified. She was just the kind of girl I liked to look at, yet for some reason I hardly dared allow my eyes to stray in her direction. I could look at Miss Blythe, stare at her, indeed, till further notice in the most callous, cold-blooded way, but my glances studiously avoided her friend. Her name was Emily Purvis, the friend's name, I mean. I had a general impression that she had big eyes, light brown hair, and a smile which lit up her face like sunshine. I am aware that this sounds slightly drivelling. If it were another man, I should say that his language reminded me of a penny novelette. But my mood at the moment was pronouncedly imbecile. I was only capable of drivel. The girl had come upon me with such a shock of surprise. I had never expected to light on anything of that kind when pursuing the niece of Benjamin Batters. Miss Purvis was small. I like small women. I am aware that this is an age of muscularity, and that athletics do cause women to run to size, but for my part I like them little. Bone, muscle, stamina, these things are excellent. From a physical point of view, no doubt, the Amazon, when she is fit, in good condition, is all that she should be. I admire such a one, even when her height is 5'11", but I do not like her. I never could. As to having a woman of that description for a wife, the saints forbid. And Miss Purvis was little, not a dwarf, nor insignificant in any sense, but small enough. I am 6'1", and I judged that the top of her head would just come above my shoulder. Daintily fashioned, curves, not angles. Exactly the kind of girl 99 men out of 100 would feel inclined to take into their arms at sight. The 100th man would be a sexless idiot, and also most probably stone blind. It was astonishing how afraid I felt of her. It was an odd drive to my chambers. My client talked, Miss Purvis talked. I only dropped a boobyish remark at intervals. The idea that such a girl as that should only have 15 shillings between her and starvation, and that to keep herself alive she should have to seek another situation in such a den of roguery, servitude, and humiliation as that from which she had just escaped, was to me most horrible. I was irritated, illogically enough, because Benjamin Batters had not left her a portion of the income which was derived from those bonds of his. I was conscious of the fact that he had no cognizance of her existence, but at that moment that was not the point. 2 incidents marked our progress. The first was when Miss Blythe, putting her head out of the cab window, recognized, with every appearance of surprise, a man standing on the pavement whom she called Isaac Rudd. I observed that he saw us, and the keenness with which his gaze was fastened on us. There was a seafaring air about the fellow, which recalled Max Lander to my mind. Although I said nothing of it to the ladies, I had a shrewd suspicion that he was following us in another cab, which he had hailed as soon as we had passed. 2 or 3 times when I looked out I noticed that a second four-wheeler seemed to be keeping us in sight. In view of my recent experiences, had I been alone I should have lost no time in putting the question to the proof. Not only, however, just then were my wits a good deal wanting, but I felt a not unnatural disinclination to cause my companions uneasiness. Especially as I more than suspected that Miss Blythe might have enough of that little later on. The second incident was a trifle startling. Shortly after catching sight of the man she called Isaac Rudd, she gave a sudden exclamation. She was staring at something with wide-open eyes. I looked to see what it was. There, on her knee, was my god of fortune. Her surprise at its appearance was unmistakably genuine. How it had come there she was unable to explain. It might have been materialized, as the theosophists have it, out of the intangible air, but it seemed that it was not the first time she had encountered it. It had been slipped into her hand the night before by a fantastically attired individual who was evidently my length-without-breadth visitor, whom I had interrupted in his pseudo-service, and who had dropped out of my office window with my god of fortune in his hand. Although I had no reference to that occurrence, I was none the less struck by the fashion in which he had chosen to introduce himself to the niece of Mr. Benjamin Batters. The singularity of the thing went further. When the doll was slipped into the lady's hand, it was cased in a piece of paper, as it was when it was slipped into mine, from which again, exactly as it happened with me, it forced itself apparently of its own volition. I made no comment, but with Miss Blythe's permission I put the doll into my waistcoat pocket, concluding that it might prove worthy of more minute examination than I had yet bestowed on it, even to the breaking of it open to discover the works. This is a sombre chronicle. I trust I am a sober chronicler. I wish to set down nothing which suggests the marvellous. I have an inherent dislike to wonders, being without faith. When men speak of the inexplicable, I think of trickery, and of some quality which is not perception. Therefore, I desire it to be understood that the following lines are written without prejudice, and that of what happened there may be a perfectly simple explanation which escaped my notice. I trust that there is. I had read the missionary's letter, and the will, and had handed to Miss Blythe the sealed enclosure. When she opened it she found that within the packet was a little wooden box. On lifting the lid of this box, the first thing she saw, which we all saw, was my god of fortune, or its double. It was just inside the box, staring at her as it lay face upwards. Feeling in my waistcoat pocket for the duplicate, I found that it had gone. It had apparently passed into that wooden box, which had, until that moment, remained inviolate within that sealed enclosure. How, I do not pretend to say. It was but a little thing, yet it affected me more than a greater might have done. A succession of trifles light as air may unsettle the best balanced man. One begins by degrees to have feeling that something is taking place, or is about to take place, of a character to which one is unaccustomed. And under such circumstances the unaccustomed, particularly when one is unable to even dimly apprehend the form which it may take, one instinctively resents. I decided that, at any rate, that should be the last appearance of the god of fortune. Taking it from Miss Blythe, who yielded it readily enough, I walked with it to the fire, intending to make an end of it by burning. As I went something pricked my fingers so suddenly and so sharply that in my surprise and, I might add, pain, the doll dropped from my hand. When we came to look for it, it was not to be found. We searched under tables and chairs in all possible and impossible places, with a degree of eagerness which approached the ludicrous, without success. The god of fortune had disappeared. I am reluctant to confess how much I was disconcerted by so trivial an occurrence. I must have been morbidly disposed, still liverish. That is the only explanation which I can offer why I should all at once have felt so strongly that everything connected with Mr. Benjamin Batters' testamentary dispositions wore a malign aspect. I was even haunted, the word is used advisedly, by a wholly unreasonable conviction that Miss Blythe was being dragged into a position of imminent peril. This position of foolishness of mine was rendered more ridiculous by the fact that Miss Blythe's own mood was all the other way, and in this respect Miss Purvis was at one with her. Somewhat to my surprise, they seemed to see nothing in the situation but what was pleasant. Miss Blythe's attitude was one of frank delight. She had never known Mr. Batters personally. All she knew of him was to the disadvantage of his character. She was enraptured by the prospect of a fortune and a house, It seemed she had a lover. In her mind, fortune, house, and lover were associated in a delightful jumble. She did not appear to realize that the acceptance of the fortune, if the attached conditions were to stand, meant the practical ostracizing of the lover. Nor at the instant did I feel called upon to go out of the way to make the whole position plain to her understanding. It would have meant the spoiling of the happiest hours she had known. Chapter 21 of The Joss, a Reversion. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Narrated by Christopher Walters. The Joss, a Reversion, by Richard Marsh. Chapter 21. The Agitation of Miss Purvis. That bachelor's ball, a night at a music hall, was of no avail in diverting my mind from the house in Camford Street. In the body, I might be present at a vocal rendering of the latest things in comic songs. In the spirit, I was the other side of the water. Being the night was over, I was there physically, too. As the 10 o'clock turn was coming on, and the brilliancy of the entertainment was supposed to have reached high-water mark, I walked down the stairs of the Cerulean and out into the street. I strolled down the Haymarket without any clear idea of where I meant to go. "You're an ass," I told myself. "An ass, sir. If you'd stopped to see Polly Floyd, she'd have driven the cobwebs out of your head. You pay 5 shillings for a seat, and when, at last, there is going to be something worth looking at and listening to, you get out of it and throw away your money. At this time of night, where do you think you're going?" I knew all the same, although even to myself I did not choose to confess it. Camford Street. I made for it as straight as I could. It was 10:30 when I got there. The street was nearly all in darkness. The public houses were open, but as they were not of the resplendent order, they were of but little use as illuminants. Mr. Kennard's establishment was shut. Lights were visible in but a few of the houses. Number 84 in the prevailing shadows looked black as pitch. If the 2 girls had been obedient to the injunctions laid down in Mr. Batter's will, and that first night at any rate they would have hardly ventured to contravene them, they were long since within doors. Doing what? Asleep? Were both of them asleep? I wondered if she was awake what occupied her thoughts. Was she thinking of the person in the street? Too ridiculous. Absurd. It is amazing of what crass stupidity even the wisest men are capable. Why should a girl who was a perfect stranger be thinking, whether awake or sleeping at that hour of the night, of an individual who had been brought into accidental business association, on one occasion only, with a friend of hers? I kept on putting such brain-splitting questions to myself, without avail. I simply shirked them. I only hoped. That was all. I had some nonsensical notion of hammering at the front door to see what would happen, but as I was unable to perceive what could result except possible scandal. Suppose they were in bed? They might think I was a burglar or Mr. Batter's ghost. I held my hand. I was not too far gone to be incapable of realizing that frightening a woman into wits was not the best way of winning her trust and confidence. That she was of a nervous temperament I thought probable. I like a woman to be reasonably timorous. What might have been expected happened. My persistency in strolling about, and behaving as if I were a suspicious character, at last succeeded in arousing the attention of the police. An overcoated constable strode up to me. I stopped him, feeling that it might be better for me to open the ball. "Officer, do you know anything about the house opposite, number 84? He eyed me, apparently arriving at a conclusion that I bore no conspicuous signs of belonging to the criminal classes. "We call it the haunted house." Haunted? Why haunted? It was a horrible idea that she should be sleeping alone, or as good as alone, in a house which bore the reputation of being haunted. Not that I placed any credence in such rubbish myself, but when she was concerned, it was a different matter. "I can't say why, but it's known as such in the force, and I believe among the people in the neighbourhood." "Ah, well, officer, 2 friends of mine, young ladies, have taken up their residence at number 84, and as they're all alone, I shall be obliged if you'll keep an eye upon the house. If you see any ghosts about the place, you run 'em in." I gave that policeman half a crown. I do not know what he thought of me. I was completely conscious that if I continued to placate members of the constabulary force with 2 and 6 each, I should not find the Batter's connection a lucrative one. It was all owing to the state of mind I was in. To have remained in her immediate neighborhood, I would have showered half-crowns. Yet I tore myself away and went straight home to bed. Hardly to sleep, for such slumber as visited my eyes was troubled by strange imaginings. It would be incorrect to say that all night I dreamt of her, for most of my dreams took the shape of nightmare visitations, but I do not hesitate to affirm that they were caused by her. I had not been troubled by such things for years. If she was not the cause of them, what was? I awoke at some most unseemly hour. Since sleep was evidently at an end, I concluded that it might be as well to have done with what had been, for the first time for many nights, a bed of discomfort. So I arose and dressed. It was a fine morning. I could see that the sun was shining, even from my window. I concluded that I would put into execution a resolution which I had often formed, and as often broken, of going for a walk before breakfast. One is constantly being told, for the most part by people who know nothing about it, how beautiful London is in the morning early sun. As soon as I was in Fleet Street, I saw something which I had certainly not expected to see, at least not there just then. Miss Purvis. Fleet Street was deserted. She was the only living thing to be seen. The sight of her nearly took me off my feet. She had been in my thoughts. Her sudden instant presence was like the miraculous materialization of some telepathic vision. I felt as if I had heard her calling me and had come. She was distant some 50 yards and was coming towards me. I was at once struck by the air of wildness which was about her. It moved me strangely. She was not attired for the street, having on neither hat nor bonnet, jacket or gloves. Her hair was in disorder. She looked as if she had been in some singular affray. My heart jumped so within my breast that I had, perforce, to stand as if I had been rooted to the ground. Conscience-stricken, I railed at myself for not having last night broken down the door instead of lounging idly in the street. All the while I knew that there was something wrong. I owned it now, though I had been reluctant to admit it then. I think she saw me as soon as I saw her. At sight of me, she broke into a little tremulous run, swaying from side to side, as if she was so weak that her feet were not entirely under her own control. It was pitiful to watch. Tearing myself from where I seemed to be rooted, I ran to her. I had reached her in less than half a dozen seconds. When I was close, stretching out her hand, she cried in a faint little voice, "It's you! It's you! Oh, Mr. Payne!" She did not throw herself into my arms. She had not so much strength. She sank into them and was still. I saw that she had fainted. I bore her to my rooms. It was the least that I could do. No one was in sight, and though no doubt some straggler might have soon appeared, I could not tell what kind of person it might prove to be. I could hardly keep her out there in the street awaiting the advent of some quite possibly undesirable stranger, even had I been willing, which I was not. Lifting her into my arms, I carried her to my chambers. Not once did she move. She was limp as some lay figure. I laid her on the couch. So far as I could judge, at first she did not breathe. Then all at once she sighed. A tremblement seemed to go all over her. I expected her to open her eyes and see me there. I feel as if I had been guilty of I know not what, and feared to meet her accusatory glances. But instead she lay quite still, though I could see that her bosom rose and fell, moved by gentle respirations. My blood boiled as I wondered what could have made her cheek so white. On a sudden her eyes unclosed. For some seconds she looked neither to the right nor left. She seemed to be considering the ceiling. Then with a start she turned and saw me. "Where am I?" she exclaimed. "You are safe in my chambers. You know who I am, do you not?" "You are Mr. Payne. Oh, Mr. Payne!" She began to cry. Turning from me, she buried her face in the cushion. "Miss Purvis, what is wrong? What is the matter? Tell me what happened." She continued to cry, her sobs shaking her whole frame. I was beginning to be conscious that the situation was a more delicate one than had at first appeared. After all, the girl was but a stranger to me. I had not the slightest right to attempt to offer her consolation. I remembered to have read somewhere that you ought to know a man intimately for 15 years before presuming to poke his fire. If that were the case, the imagination failed to picture how long a man ought to be acquainted with a girl before venturing to try, with the aid of a pocket handkerchief, to dry her tears. She kept on trying. It was a severe trial to one's more or less misty sense of what etiquette demanded. Ought I to remain to be a witness of her tears? She might not like it. She might very reasonably resent being practically compelled to exhibit her grief in the presence of a stranger. On the other hand, to leave her alone to, as it were, cry it out, might be regarded from certain points of view as the acme of brutality. What I should have liked to have done would have been to take her in my arms and comfort her as if she had been a child. In the midst of my bewilderment, it irritated me to think of the asinine notions which would enter my head. Did I inquired of myself, wish to make an enemy, a righteous enemy, of the girl for life? I tried the effect of another inquiry. Miss Purvis, I wish you would tell me what has happened. Polly! That was all she said, and that utterance was so blurred by a choking gasp as to render it uncertain if that was what she had said. Polly? Who is Polly? Quite possibly my tone was one of dubiety. Either that or the question itself affected her in a fashion which surprised me. She stopped as suddenly as if the fountain of her tears had been worked by some automatic attachment. Raising herself slightly from the couch, she looked at me, her eyes swollen with weeping. Polly! You ask me who is Polly, and you're her lawyer! Her lawyer? Polly's... You're not referring to Miss... Of course! How stupid of me! I had forgotten that Miss Blythe's Christian name was Mary. I suppose that by her friends she is known as Polly. I hope that nothing has happened to Miss Blythe. Do you think that I should be here if nothing had happened to Polly? The question was put with an amount of vigor which, in one so fragile, was almost surprising. I was delighted to see her in such a renewal of vigor. It made me feel more at ease. I am only too fortunate, Miss Purvis, whatever the object of your visit. If you will permit me, I will get you a cup of tea. That's what you're wanting. I live so much alone, I'm accustomed to do all sorts of things for myself. Here's a gas stove. In 5 minutes the water will be boiling, and you shall have your tea. It will do you an immensity of good. I had always understood that girls liked tea, but as I moved about the room, preparing to set the kettle on the stove, she stared at me with an apparent want of comprehension. Do you suppose that I've come through the streets like this just to get a cup of tea? Never mind for the moment why you've come, Miss Purvis. The great thing is that you have come. Tea first, explanation afterwards. If you take my advice, you'll let that be the order of procedure. Nothing like a good brew to promote clarity of exposition. I lit the stove. Mr. Payne! Mr. Payne! She jumped off the couch in quite a passion of excitement. Now, Miss Purvis, I do beg you will control yourself. I give you my word that in less than 5 minutes the water will be boiling. She stamped her foot. Rage certainly became her. You keep talking about your tea when Polly's killed. Killed? Miss Purvis, you don't mean that Miss Blythe is killed? She is. Or something awful, and worse. But I placed the kettle on the stove to free my hand. Let me understand you plainly. Do you wish to be taken literally when you say that Miss Blythe is killed? If she isn't, she will be soon. I'm afraid I must ask you to be a little plainer. Where is Miss Blythe? She's in one of Bluebeard's chambers. I began to wonder if her mind was wandering. I'm afraid that I still don't... That's the name she gave them. In that dreadful house in Camford Street there are 2 rooms locked up, and Polly's in one. I see. I did not, though at the time I fancied that I began to perceive a dim glimmer of light. But if, as you say, the rooms were locked, how did she get in, and what happened to her when she was in? In reply, Miss Purvis poured out a series of disjointed statements which I experienced some difficulty in following and more in reconciling. As I listened, in spite of her manifold attractions, I could not but feel that if she should figure in the witness box in a case in which I was concerned, I would rather that she gave evidence for the other side. That house was full of wickedness. Indeed, in what sense? There's a woman in it. A woman? There is a woman. That's all right. All right? I was afraid there wouldn't be another woman. Afraid? Women are ever so much worse than men. And she's awful. She says she's the daughter of the gods. A little wanting, perhaps. I touched my head. Apparently Miss Purvis did not catch the allusion. Wanting? She's wanting in everything she ought to have. She's not to be described. I thought she was rats. You thought she was rats? The house is full of them in swarms. They'd have eaten me, picked the flesh off my bones if I'd given them the chance. I was becoming more and more persuaded that agitation had been too much for her. I had never encountered a case of a person being eaten alive by rats, except the leading one of Bishop Hayto in his rat tower on the Rhine, and that was scarcely quotable. Now, Miss Purvis, the kettle is just on the boil. I do beg you'll have a cup of tea before we go any further. With Polly lying dead? But is she laying dead? I believe she's eaten. Eaten? By rats? There was a dryness in my tone which was perhaps rather more significant than I had intended. "Are you laughing at me? Are you laughing at me? Are you laughing at me?" She repeated her inquiry for the second time with a great sob in her voice, which made me realize what a brute I was. "I am very far from laughing. I am only anxious that you should not make yourself ill." "You're not! You're not!" She stamped her foot again. I gazed at her with admiration. She was the first beautiful woman I remembered to have seen whose personal appearance was positively improved by getting a temper. "You're laughing at me all the time. You haven't a spark of human feeling in you." This was an outrageous charge. At that moment I would have given a great part of what I possessed to have been able to take her in my arms. "What I've endured this night no tongue can tell, no pen describe. I've gone through enough to make my hair turn white. Hasn't it turned white?" "It certainly hasn't. It's lovely hair." "Lovely?" She stopped to look at me. Seeing something in my countenance, she alone knew what it was, which made her put her hands up to her face and again burst into tears. "Oh, Mr. Payne!" My name, as it came from her lips, was a wail which cut me to the heart. Her agitation was making me agitated too. I had only one resource. "Now, Miss Purvis, the kettle is really boiling. You say another word about that kettle, I'll knock it over." The small virago was facing me, the tears running down her cheeks, small fists clenched as if, on that point at least, she was capable of being as good as her word. "Knock it over by all means, Miss Purvis, if it pleases you. I only want to give you pleasure." "Mr. Payne!" Up went her hands again. "Don't do that. I can't bear to see you cry." "Then why are you so unkind?" "I don't know. It's my stupidity, I suppose. It's far from my intention to be unkind. I know. I'm a nothing and a nobody, an impertinent creature who has come to bother you with a tale which you don't believe and which you wouldn't interest you if you did, so you just make fun of me." "Don't say that, not that. Don't say that to me, that you are nothing and a nobody." I am. "You are not." "Then why do you treat me as you do?" "Treat you? How do I treat you? There is nothing I wouldn't do for you, nothing." "Mr. Payne! Miss Purvis!" I do not know how it happened. I protest in cold blood and in black and white that I have no idea. But on a sudden I found that I had my arms around her. A moment before I had no intention of doing anything of the kind, that I swear. And I can only suppose that it was because, in her agitation, she really did not know what was happening, that she allowed her head to rest against my breast. It was while it was there that a voice said, proceeding from the neighbourhood of the door, "This is a bit of all right, but where do I come in?" End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of The Joss, a Reversion. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Narrated by Christopher Walters. The Joss, a Reversion, by Richard Marsh. Chapter 22. Luke. I have only to point out that, despite the interruption, Miss Purvis continued in the same position without making the slightest effort to disengage herself, to make it clear that she, to at least a certain extent, was unconscious of her surroundings. For my part, I held her somewhat closer, so that I might act as a more efficient protection against I knew not what. Glancing in the direction from which the voice had come, I perceived that a distinctly disreputable individual had intruded himself uninvited into the room. He was a tall, shambling fellow, with a chronic stoop, extending even to the neighbourhood of his knees. His attire consisted of a variety of odds and ends, all of them emphatically the worse for wear. A dirty cloth cap, apparently a size too small, was stuck at the back of his head. His black, greasy hair formed a ragged, uneven fringe upon his forehead, reaching in one place nearly to the top of his long, pointed nose. His mouth was too wide for his face, which was narrow. As he stood there, with it open, in what I presumed he intended for a friendly grin, the fact was revealed that seemingly every alternative tooth in his head was missing. Even in that moment of agitation I could not help mentally noting that I had never seen such a collection of fangs in one man's head before. "What do you mean, sir, coming in without knocking?" "What do I mean? That's what I'm here to tell you. And as for knocking, I did knock with my knuckles, but you was too engaged to notice my modest knock, so seeing the door was open, I just come in. Then you'll just go out again, and sharp's the word." While the fellow was speaking, Miss Purvis, awaking for the first time to a sense of her delicate position, drew herself away from me. Turning, she stared at the intruder. "Sharp's the word, is it? That's how it may be. Anyhow, it don't apply to me because I'm here on business." "Then come in business hours. I don't receive clients at this time of day. Don't you see that I'm engaged?" "Engaged, are you? That's as it should be. I congratulate you. Likewise the young lady for having one so outspoken a young gentleman. A one that's well spoken of, from all I hear." Whether the fellow was intentionally impertinent, I could not tell. It was uncommonly awkward for both of us. Miss Purvis went scarlet. I felt like knocking him down. "Now then, out you go. Softly, softly. You listen to me before the band begins to play. I don't allow no one to lay hands on me without laying them off back again." The fellow extended, to ward me off, a pair of enormously long arms. Observing them, I realized that if he would only hold himself upright, his height would be gigantic. I am no bantam, yet, as I considered his evident suppleness and sinewy build, I thought it possible that in him I had met my match. Anyhow, I did not wish to indulge in a rough and tumble before Miss Purvis. "Who are you, and what do you want?" "What I want, first of all, is to know who you are. Are you Mr. Frank Payne?" "I am." "I'm told that you're making inquiries about a party named Batters. Now, I'm making inquiries about a party named Batters, too, and if you was to tell me what you know, I might tell you what I know." "You are quite right. I have been inquiring for a person of the name of Batters, and if you will come again, say between 10 and 11, I shall be glad to hear what you have to say. By that time I shall be disengaged." "You'll be disengaged, will you? That's hard on the young lady. Engaged to her at 7 and disengaged between 10 and 11, all of the same day." "Look here, my man. I'm looking, Mr. Payne, I'm looking. And I do hope I'm looking milder nor what you are. May I make so bold as to ask if this young lady's name is Blythe?" "It is not." "I thought it couldn't be. It wouldn't hardly seem natural for a beautiful young lady like she is to be grafted from a stock like that. Lovely is what I call her, downright lovely." "Oh, Mr. Payne!" Miss Purvis held out her hand. I took it. "If you suppose because I have borne with you so far I will bear with you much further, you're mistaken. If you take my advice, you'll be careful." "That's right, sir, that's quite right. Careful's the lay for me." "If you have anything to say, be quick about it." "Well, I do happen to have something which I wish to say, and that's a fact. But as for quickness, I'm afraid that I'm not naturally so quick as perhaps you might desire." He stopped to regard me with his bold yet shifty eyes, as if he were endeavouring to ascertain what sort of person I might be. When he spoke again, it was to put a question for which I was unprepared. "Where's Batters?" "Mr. Batters, if you're referring to the late Mr. Benjamin Batters, is dead." "Dead? Oh, late, is he? Oh, he was the sort to die early, was Batters. Where might he happen to have died?" "On Great Car Island." "Great Car Island? Oh, and where might that be?" "On the other side of the world." "That's some way off, isn't it?" "Most unfortunate. I take it most uncivil of Batters to go and die in a place like that, especially when I should like to have a look at his grave. You don't happen to know where it is?" "I do not, except that I have been given to understand that he was buried where he died." "That's so. He would be. In the local cemetery with the flowers growing all around. In a nice deep grave with a stone on top of it to keep him from getting out of it, with some words cut on it like 'He lies in peace.' There's no doubt about his lying, anyhow, I'll take my oath to that." He emitted a sound which might have been meant for a chuckle. It startled Miss Purvis. "You don't happen to know when he died?" "I do not know the precise date, but it was at any rate some 3 or 4 months ago." "That's odd. Very. Because as it happens, I was with him some 3 or 4 months ago, and I never saw nothing about him that looked like dying. So far from dying, he was lively, uncommon. Fleas wasn't in it with the liveliness of Batters. And to think that he should have died with me looking at him all the time, and yet knowing nothing at all about it. It shows you that there is such a thing as miracles." "Do I understand you to say that 3 months ago you were in the company of Mr. Batters?" "I was, and likewise 4 months ago, and I hope to be in his company again before long, dead or alive. It won't be my fault if I'm not, you may go the law on that." There was something about the fellow which struck me as peculiar. It was not alone his impudence, which belonged to another sort of singularity. There seemed to be a covert meaning in his manner and his words. I turned to Miss Purvis. "If you don't mind, I think I will hear what this person has to say. It may be of importance to your friend.
If you will allow me to leave you here, I think I may arrive quicker at his meaning if I am alone with him." She signified her consent. I led the way into the office. Without showing in any way that he objected, the stranger followed. "Now, my man, let us understand each other as clearly as we can, and keep to the point as closely as you are able. What's your name?" "Luke." "Luke what?" "Luke nothing. I'm known to those who know me best as Saint Luke, after the apostle, being of saint-like character, and in general Luke's name's enough for me. They was modest where I come from." "What are you?" "A sailor man, late of the good ship the Flying Scud." "The Flying Scud?" I stared at him askance, not certain that I had caught the name correctly. That particular ship seemed in the air. "Then do you know Captain Lander?" As I asked the question his manner changed. It became suspicious. Thrusting his thumbs into his waistcoat armholes, he eyed me warily, as if he had all at once been put upon his guard. "How much do you know about it?" "What do you mean? How much do I know about what?"
"What's Captain Lander told you about me?"
"About you? To me Captain Lander has never so much as mentioned your name." A sudden wild thought came into my head. Are you Benjamin Batters?" The fellow's mouth opened so wide I could see right down his throat. "Me? Benjamin Batters? Good Lord, what made you ask such a thing as that?" "Are you? Are you?" As I watched, I doubted more and more. "I believe you are." "I'm not. Good Lord, you ask Captain Lander if I am. You said yourself just now that he was dead and buried." "And you hinted that he was not, but that he was still alive." Putting his hand up to his brow, he brushed the fringe of hair partially aside, glancing furtively about the room. "That's as may be. That's another matter altogether. But I don't like your asking me if I was Batters. No man would. Have you ever seen him?" "Never, unless I see him now." "Meaning me?" "I never came across such a man. What do you mean by keeping on asking me if I'm Batters? What are you driving at? I won't have it, whatever it is." "Why, Batters—" He stopped, then second thoughts appearing best, changed from heat to cold. "Batters was not my sort at all." The man's manner puzzled me. What was there about Benjamin Batters which makes you resent any comparison with him? He hesitated, putting up his fingers to scratch his head, visibly perturbed. "Excuse me, but I came here to put a question or two, not to answer any. If you'd told me at the first that Captain Lander was a friend of yours, I should have taken myself off straight away, like as I'm going to now." I stepped between him and the door. "No, you don't. You stopped at the beginning to please yourself. Now you'll remain here a little longer to please me. Before you leave this room, you'll give me satisfactory answers to one or two questions." "Who says I will?" "I do. If you decline, I send for a policeman. Then I think you'll find yourself in Queer Street." His disturbance obviously increased. "Now, Mr. Payne, I've done nothing to you to make you behave nasty to me. If I made a mistake in coming here to make a few inquiries, I do apologise. And no man can do more than that, so there's no harm to either side. Was Batters your shipmate?" "My shipmate? Was he an officer or a member of the crew on board the Flying Scud?" "My gracious, no." "Was he on the Flying Scud?" "He might have been." "As passenger?" "The Flying Scud's a cargo boat. She don't carry no passengers." "If he was neither officer, sailor, nor passenger, in what capacity was he there?" "You ask Captain Lander. He was in command, not me. I've had enough of this bullyragging. You let me go before there's trouble." "Gently, my man, gently. Now come, be frank with me. What is the mystery about Benjamin Batters? I see there is one." "That's more than I can tell you, straight it is. I wish it wasn't. If you was to ask me, I should say he was all a mystery, Batters was." "I suppose he was a man?" "A man?" The inquiry, suggested by the fashion in which he persisted in shuffling with my questions, had an odd effect upon my visitor. He glanced from side to side and up and down as if desirous at any cost to avoid meeting my eye. "It depends on what you call a man." "You know very well what I call a man. Was he a man in the sense that you and I are men?" He shuddered. "The Lord forbid that I should be in any way like him. The Lord forbid." I observed him narrowly, at a loss to make him out. That there was something very curious about Benjamin Batters I was becoming more and more persuaded. I had as little doubt that my visitor had at least some knowledge of what it was. Equally obvious, however, was the fact that he had reasons of his own for concealing what he knew. How I could compel him to make a confidant of me against his will, I failed to see. I tried another tack. "You say that you were in Batters' company 3 months ago." "I might have been." "How long ago is it since you last saw him?" "Couldn't exactly say." "Where did you last see him?" "Where?" He looked round and round the room as if seeking for information. Then the fashion of his countenance changed, and an ugly look came on it. "I'm not going to tell you when I last saw him last, nor where. It's no business of yours. You mind your own business and leave mine alone. And as for your policeman, I don't care for no policeman. Why should I? I'm an honest man. So you get out of my way and let me pass, and that's all about it." "Have you seen Benjamin Batters within the month?" "Never you mind." "Your words are a sufficient answer. I believe you have been conspiring with Benjamin Batters with fraudulent intent. If you do not furnish me with abundant proof that my suspicions are unfounded, I shall summon a constable and give you into custody upon that charge." It was a piece of pure bluff upon my part, which failed. "That's the time of day, is it? I've been conspiring with him, have I? What have I been conspiring about? I have no doubt that that is a point on which Captain Lander will be able to show more than sufficient light." My words had at last struck home. What lent them a special weight I could not even guess, but that they had moved him more than anything which had gone before his behaviour showed. "He will he? So that's the game you're after. You're a lawyer and I'm a poor, silly sailor man, so you think you can just play just what tricks with me you please. But there's something else Captain Lander can tell you if you ask him, and that's that I can be disagreeable when I'm crossed, and if you don't move away from that door inside a brace of shakes, I'm going to be disagreeable now. Don't threaten me, my man." "Threaten?" His tone suggested that he scorned being thought capable of threatening only, and his action proved it. He came at me with a suddenness for which I was unprepared. Putting his arms about me while I was still unready, he lifted me off my feet. As he was still holding me aloft, crooking my leg inside his, I bore on him with all my might, and brought him with a crash to the floor. Although he lay underneath, his arms still retained their grip. While I hesitated whether to attack the man in earnest or to remonstrate with him instead, for Miss Purvis might at any moment look in, and then a nice opinion she would have of me, someone standing behind slipped what seemed to be a cord over my head, and drew it so tight about my throat that in an instant I was all but choked. When, gasping for breath, I put up my hand to free myself, it was drawn still tighter. So tight indeed that not only did it cut like a knife, but I felt as if my tongue was being torn out of my mouth, and I lost all consciousness. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of The Joss, a Reversion. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Narrated by Christopher Walters. The Joss, a Reversion, by Richard Marsh. Chapter 23. The Trio Return. How long I remained unconscious I could not say. When I did come to, during some seconds I was unable to realize my position. It was like waking out of an uncomfortably heavy sleep. Consciousness returned by degrees, and painfully, as it were, by a series of waves which were like so many shocks. I was oppressed by nausea, my eyes were dim, my brain seemed reeling as if it were making disconcerting efforts to retain its equilibrium. It was some time before I understood that I was still in my own room, yet longer before I had some faint comprehension of the situation I was in, and of what was taking place about me. It was probably some minutes before I completely understood that I was trussed like a fowl, and that the exquisite pain which I was enduring was because of the tightness and ingenuity of my bonds. I was on the floor with my back against the wall. Cords which were about my wrists were attached to my ankles, passed up my back, then round my throat, so that each movement I made I bade fair to choke myself. It was a diabolical contrivance. The cords were thin ones, red-hot wires they seemed to be. They cut my wrists like knives and burned them as with fire. My legs were drawn under my body in an unnatural and uncomfortable position. They were torn by cramp, yet whenever I made the slightest attempt to ease them I dragged at the cord which was about my throat. One thing seemed plain. If the worst came to the worst, I should experience no difficulty in committing suicide. Apparently I had only to let my head forward to be strangled. By way of making the condition of affairs entirely satisfactory, something sharp had been forced into my mouth, which not only acted as a gag, effectually preventing my uttering a sound, but which made it difficult for me to breathe. That it was cutting me was made plain by the blood which I was compelled to swallow. As I have said, it was not at first that I had a clear perception of the personal plight that I was in. When it dawned on me at last I had a morbid satisfaction in learning that I was not alone in it. Someone so close on the left as to be almost touching me was in a similar plight. It was St. Luke. I had mistily imagined that the seafaring associate of the more and more mysterious Benjamin Batters had been in some way responsible for my misadventure. Not a bit of it. I had wronged the honest man. So far as I could perceive, his plight was an exact reproduction of my own. The same attention had been paid to his physical comfort, only apparently the gag had been so placed in his mouth as to leave him more freedom to gasp and to grunt and to groan. Who, then, was responsible for this pretty performance? What man or men had I so wronged as to be deserving this return? The problem was a nice one. I looked for the solution. I found it, and in doing so found also something else which filled me with such a tumult of passion that I actually momentarily forgot the egregious position I was in. Miss Purvis had been served as I had been. She had either, wondering at my delay, or startled by the noise, peeped into the office, and so disturbed the ruffians at their work, or the miscreants, penetrating into the inner room, had found her there and dragged her out. However it had been, there she was, trussed and gagged against the wall upon my right. They had shown no respect for a woman, but had handled her precisely as they had done St. Luke and me. My brain felt as if it would have burst as I thought of the indignity upon which they must have used her, and of the agony, mental and bodily, she must have endured and be enduring still. Her face, her pretty face, was white as the sheet of paper on which I write. Her eyes, her lovely eyes, were closed. I hoped that she had fainted, and so was oblivious of suffering and shame. Yet as I watched her utter stillness, I half feared she might be dead. The gentlemen who were responsible for this pleasant piece of work were three. They were there before me in plain sight. It was with an odd sense that it was just what I had expected that I recognized the trio who had already paid me a visit in the silent watches of the night. There was the imposing, elderly, bald-headed gentleman who represented length without breadth. There also were his two attendant satellites. How to account for their assiduous interest in my unpretending office was beyond my power. Nor did I understand why it should have been necessary to use such drastic measures against the Lady St. Luke and myself. Still less, I must admit it frankly, when I observed their conspicuous lack of avoirdupois, did I gather how they managed to make us so easy a prey. Under ordinary conditions, I should have been quite willing to take the three on single-handed. The truth probably was that St. Luke and I had unwittingly played into their dexterous hands. Had we not been engaged in matching ourselves against each other, we should have been more than a match for them. But when they came in and found the sailor-man upon the floor prisoning me close within his arms, all they had to do was slip one cord around my throat and another around his. We were at their mercy. No man can show much fight when he is being strangled, especially when the job is in the hands of a skilled practitioner. Never mind what the theory is, that is the teaching of experience. What they wanted, with so much anxiety in my office, I was unable to guess. They had already purloined the God of Fortune. Stay! It had been returned to me again. I had dropped it on the floor, been unable to find it. Could it be that they were after it a second time, I wondered? What peculiar significance, what attribute could that small plaything have? Beyond doubt, they were treating my belongings with scant regard for the feelings of their owner. If they failed to find what they were seeking, it would not be for want of a thorough quest. Pretty well everything the apartment contained they subjected to a minute examination. They allowed nothing to escape them. It was delightful to watch them. If I had been suffering a little less physical inconvenience, I should have enjoyed myself immensely. They might be Orientals, but if they were not professional burglars in their own country, then they ought to have been. They were artists, anyway. To note one point, there was such order in their methods. They began at one corner of the room, and they worked right round it, emptying boxes, turning out drawers, pulling the books out of their covers and the stuffing out of the chairs, and the furniture to pieces generally, in search of secret hiding-places. Then they began tapping at the walls, tearing off scraps of paper here and there to see what was behind. It beat me to imagine what it was they were after, though it was flattering to think that a first-rate hand at concealment they must be taking me to be. Apparently they were under the impression that a solicitor had plenty of waste time which he occupied by secreting odds and ends in solid walls. The rapidity with which they did all they did do was simply astonishing, particularly when one had to admit with what thoroughness it was done. But when they came to, dragging the carpet up and tearing boards from the floor, I began to wonder if they were going through the house piecemeal. The litter was beyond description. My practice might not have been a large one, but my papers were many. When a large number of documents are thrown down anywhere, anyhow, they are apt to look untidy. Even in that moment of martyrdom, I groaned in spirit as I thought of the labour which their rearrangement would involve. One mental note I did take, that despite the eagerness with which they turned out papers from every possible receptacle, they seemed to attach to them but scant importance. That they were after something connected with Mr. Benjamin Batters I had no doubt, yet they unearthed the Batters papers among the rest, even the Batters bonds, and tossed them on one side as if they contained nothing which was of interest to them. If they were able to read English I could not tell, but every now and then the tall, thin paper glanced at a paper as if it were not altogether double Dutch to him. At last, short of pulling the room itself down about their ears, they had, apparently to their own entire dissatisfaction, exhausted its resources. There was a pause in the operations. There ensued a conclave. The elderly gentleman spoke, while for the most part the others listened. What was being said I had no notion. They were sparing of gesture, so no meaning was conveyed through the eyes to the brain. I am no linguist. My knowledge of Eastern tongues is nil. I do not know what language they were speaking. Had I known, I should have been no wiser. One fact, however, was unmistakable. Their words were accompanied by glances in my direction which I did not altogether relish. If I ever saw cruelty written on a human countenance, it was on the faces of those three gentlemen. Theirs was the love of it for its own sake. Their faces were rather inhuman masks, expressionless, impassive, unfeeling. It was not difficult to conceive with what ingenuity they could contrive tortures with which to rack the nerves of some promising subject. It was easy to believe that they would put them into practice with the same composure with which they would observe the sensations of the objects of their curious experiments. I had already had some experience of their skill in more than one direction, and I did not desire a practical demonstration of it in yet another. And for the present I was to be spared the exhibition. It seemed that they all at once bethought themselves that there were other apartments of mine which still remained unsearched. Whereupon off they went to search them. To us they paid no heed. Plainly they were sufficiently acquainted with the good qualities of their handiwork to be aware that from us they need feared nothing. That we might be able to free ourselves without assistance was 1,000,000 to 1 chance, which it was unnecessary to consider. Until someone came to loose us we were bound. Of that they were absolutely sure. So they left us there to keep each other company and to console each other if we could, while they went to overhaul the rest of my establishment. It was a pleasant thought for me to dwell upon. Miss Purvis's eyes were open, but that was about the only sign of life she showed. They wandered once or twice towards me. Wandered was just the word which expressed the look which was in them. Her face was white and drawn. There was that about it which made me doubt if even yet she was conscious of what was being done. I wondered if the pain which she was suffering had taken effect upon her brain. It would not have been surprising if it had. It was only by dint of a violent and continued exercise of will that I myself was able to retain, as it were, a hold upon my senses. There was, first of all, the torture of the cramped position. Then there was the way in which the cords cut into the flesh. What particular kind of cords had been used I could not make out, but I suspected fiddle-strings. Then there was the fact that the slightest movement made with a view of obtaining relief threatened not only strangulation, but decapitation too. I wondered what the time was. A laundress, one Mrs. Parsons, was supposed to arrive at 8. It must be nearly that. I had been up for hours. I was convinced that it was hours. It must be after 8. If the woman had any regard for punctuality, at any moment she might appear. If she did not arrive within 5 minutes, she should be dismissed. How could she expect to keep my rooms in proper order if her habits were irregular? I had long wondered how it was my chambers did not do me so much credit as they might have done. I had an eye for such things, although she might not think it. Now I understood. If Mrs. Parsons would only have the sense, the honesty, the decency, to keep to her engagements and come at once, while those scoundrels were engaged elsewhere, in a moment I should be free. Then I would show them. A clock struck 7. It must be wrong. There was a second, third, fourth, all striking 7. An hour yet before the woman was even due. And whoever heard of a laundress who was punctual? Before she came, what might not happen? For another hour at least we were at the mercy of these ingenious adventurers. They reappeared. What havoc they had wrought in the rooms in which I lived and moved and had my being I could only guess. Either from their point of view they had not done mischief enough, or the result of what they had done had not been satisfactory. Plainly they were discontented. Their manner showed it. The tall gentleman spoke to his 2 associates in a tone which suggested disapprobation of their conduct. They seemed, with all possible humility, to be endeavouring to show that the fault was not entirely theirs. This he appeared unwilling to concede. Finally, flopping down onto their knees, touching the floor with their foreheads, they grovelled at his feet. So far from being appeased by this show of penitence, putting out his right foot, he gave each of them a hearty kick. The effect this had on them was comical. They sprang upright like a pair of automata, endeavouring to carry themselves as if they had been the recipient of the highest honours. The tall gentleman moved towards Miss Purvis. They meekly hung on his heels. He addressed to them remarks to which they scarcely ventured to reply. He eyed the lady, then glanced towards me. I wondered what was the connection which he supposed existed between us. Something menacing was in his air. He hovered above the helpless girl as a hawk might above a pigeon. Stretching out his cruel-looking hand, he thrust it almost in her face. I expected to see her subjected to some fresh indignity, and felt that, if she were, then rage might give me strength to break the bonds which shackled me. If such had been his intention, it was either deferred or he changed his mind. He gave a gesture in my direction. Immediately, one of his familiars, advancing, tilted me back with no more compunction than if I had been an empty beer cask. Thrusting his filthy fingers into my mouth, he dragged out the gag with so much roughness that it tore my tongue and palate as it passed. Returning me to the position which suited him best, out of simple wantonness, with the hand which held the gag he struck me a vigorous blow upon the cheek. So vigorous, as it jerked my head on one side, it seemed to cause the thong which was about my throat to nearly sever my head from my shoulders. Even as he struck me, I recognized in my assailant the individual who had dogged my steps from Camford Street, and whom afterwards I had treated to a shaking. This was his idea of crying quits. While the blood still seemed to be whirling before my eyes, I said to myself that, if all went well, to his quittance I would add another score. The last blow should not be his. The removal of the gag did not at once restore to me the faculty of speech. My mouth was bleeding. I was nearly choked by blood. My tongue was torn and sore and swollen. It felt ridiculously large for the place it was supposed to occupy. Evidently, the attenuated gentleman understood that there were reasons why I should not be expected to join in conversation until I had been afforded an opportunity to get the better of my feelings. He stood regarding me, his parchment-like visage perfectly expressionless, as if he were waiting the period when I might be reasonably required to give voice to my emotions. When, as I take it, he supposed such a time to have arrived, he addressed me, to my surprise, in English, which was not bad of its kind. "Where is the great Joss?" I had no notion of what he meant. Had I understood him perfectly, I should have been unable to give him the information he required. So soon as I attempted to speak, I found that my tongue refused, literally, to do its office. I could only produce those mumbling sounds which proceed sometimes from the mouths of those who are dumb. In his judgment, however, it seemed that I ought already to have advanced to perfect clarity of utterance. He repeated his inquiry. "Where is the great Joss? I am in haste. Tell me quick." "Untie my hands and throat." That was my reply. The words, as they came from my lips, assumed a guise in which they could hardly have been recognizable for what they were meant to be, so inarticulately were they spoken. Whether he understood them, I would not say. He ignored their meaning if he did. One of his satellites, the one who had struck me, hazarded an observation with a deep inclination of his head, but his superior paid no heed to him whatever. He persisted in his previous inquiry. "Tell me, where is the great Joss?" With an effort I mumbled an answer. "I don't know what you mean." Evidently the reply did not fall in with his view at all. He disbelieved it utterly. "Tell me, where is the great Joss, or the woman shall die." His meaning was unmistakable. He stretched out his finger towards Miss Purvis with a gesture. That he was capable of murder I had not the slightest doubt. That he would make nothing of having an innocent, unoffending girl tortured to death before my eyes, I believed. Fleet Street might be within a hop, skip, and a jump, but for the present this spot in its immediate neighbourhood was delivered over to the methods of the East. If I could not afford this monster, who had sprung from some unknown oriental haunt of merciless fiends, the satisfaction he demanded, I might expect the worst to happen before help could come. With him, I felt assured that in such matters one could rely upon the word being followed by the blow. I made an effort to appease him. I don't know where your Joss is. It dropped upon the floor." My reference, of course, was to the toy which Miss Blythe had given me, and which, when I had let it fall, I was unable to find. Still, my answer did not seem to be the one he wanted. He scrutinized me in silence for some seconds before he gave me to understand as such. "You play with me?" There was that in his tone which was anything but playful. I made all possible haste to deny the soft impeachment. "I don't. Is it the god of fortune you are after?" "The god of fortune? What do you know about the god of fortune?" "It was given to me. I let it drop. When I came to look for it, I couldn't find it anywhere." There was something about my reply which he did not like. I was sure of it by the way in which he spoke in that unknown tongue to his associates. Instantly they approached Miss Purvis, standing one on either side of her. Their attitude was ominous. "Do you wish that she shall die?" I did not. I could scarcely have more strangely desired that she should live. As I told him with such clearness of language as I could muster, considering all things I was eloquent. What it is you want from me, I don't know. Consciously, I have nothing which is yours, but you had better understand this, if you are able to understand anything at all, that only for a minute or two at most are we in your power. If you want to be let off lightly, then you will loose that lady at once. If you harm so much as a hair of her head, the law of England will make you pay for it dearly. In reply, the fellow was arrogance itself. What do we care for your law? What has your law to do with us? Are we dogs that you should use us as you choose? You have stolen and hidden the great Jos. Return him to us, or as you have shamed us, so we will shame you. Not only have I not stolen the great Joss, but I don't even know what the great Joss is. The only Joss I've seen was one about the size of my finger, which, as I've told you already, I dropped on the floor and couldn't find. You laugh at us. I do not laugh. I am speaking the simple, absolute truth. You lie. The gods have told us that the secret of the hiding place of the great Joss is here. Show it to us quickly, or the woman shall die. It is your gods who lie, not I. The fellow said something to his colleagues. At once, whipping Miss Purvis from off the floor, just for all the world as if she were a trussed fowl, they placed her on the table. "Be careful what you do!" I shouted. "It is for you to be careful. We come from far across the sea to look for the great Joss which you and yours have stolen, and you make a mock of us. We are not children that we may be mocked. Give us what is ours, or we will take what is yours, though we desire it not, and the woman shall die." I tell you, man, that if anyone has robbed you, it isn't I. I have not the faintest notion who you are or what you're after. And as for your great Joss, I've not the least idea what a great Joss is. What I say is a simple statement of fact, and what reason you suppose yourself to have for doubting me is beyond my comprehension.
That is your answer?
Don't speak as if you suspected me of a deliberate intention to deceive. What other answer can I give? If, as is possible, you are suffering from a genuine grievance, I shall be glad to be of any assistance I can. But you must first give me clearly to understand what it is you're after. At present I am completely in the dark.
The woman must die.
The fellow was impervious to reason. He repeated the words with a passionless calm which added to their significance. Again I screamed at him, "You had better be careful!" He ignored me utterly. Turning to his collaborators, he issued an order which was promptly obeyed. Loosing Miss Purvis's bonds, they stretched her out upon the table and tied her on it with a dexterous rapidity which denoted considerable practice in similar operations. I observed the proceedings with sensations which are not to be described. I had hoped that at the least extremity rage would supply me with strength with which to burst the cords which prevented me from going to her assistance. I had hoped in vain. The only result of my frenzied struggles was to increase the tension and to make my helplessness, if possible, still clearer. "Help! Help!" I yelled. "Help!" I was aware that I was the only person who lived in the house, and that the hour was yet too early for the occupants of offices to have arrived. But I was actuated by a forlorn hope that my voice might reach someone who was in a position to render aid. None came. What I had endured, and what was enduring, had robbed my voice of more than half its power, and though I shouted with what, at the moment, was the full force of my lungs, I was only too conscious that my utterance was too inarticulate, too feeble to allow my words to travel far. As for that attenuated fiend who, it was clear, was not by any means so long as he was wicked, he regarded my maniacal contortions with a degree of imperturbability which, although it was certain that he both saw and heard me, since it was impossible that it could be otherwise, not by so much as the movement of a muscle did he betray the fact. He suffered me to writhe and scream to my heart's content. He simply took no notice, that was all. When the process of tying down Miss Purvis had been completed, being informed of the fact by one of his assistants, he turned to examine with a critical eye how the work had been done. Moving round the table, he tried each ligature with his finger as he passed. Since he found no fault, apparently the way in which the woman had been laid out for slaughter met his complete approval. He condescended once more to bestow his attention upon me. "For the last time, where is the great Joss?" "I can't tell you. How can I tell you if I don't know what the great Joss is?" For God's sake, man, tell me what it is you're really after before you go too far. If you want my help, give me a chance to offer it. Explain to me what the Great Joss is. It is possible, since you appear to be so positive, that I do know something of its whereabouts. Tell me clearly what it is, and all I know is at your service. Put my words to the test, and you will find that they are true ones. To me, it seemed impossible that even such an addle-headed idiot as the individual in front of me could fail to see that I was speaking the truth. But he did. He failed entirely. He had convictions of his own, of which he was not to be disabused. "You lie again, making a mock of the gods. To the gods the woman shall be offered as a sacrifice." He spoke with a passionless calm which denoted a set purpose from which there was no turning him. I raved. I screamed myself hoarse. He paid no heed. I could do no more. I could either keep my eyes open and watch what went on, or close them, and my imagination would present me with pictures more lurid still. The situation was not rendered more agreeable by the fact that, although they had not given her back the power of speech, as they had done by me by the removal of the gag, I was conscious that she was perfectly cognizant of all that was being said, and especially of the frenzied appeals which I made on her behalf, in vain. During the minutes which followed, I was at once distraught. Now I watched with wide-open staring eyes, now I shut them, in a sudden paroxysm of doubt as to what horror I might be compelled to be an unwilling witness. Then, being haunted by frightful imaginings of what might be transpiring without my knowledge, for she could make no sound, I opened them again to see. The three scoundrels set about their hideous business with a matter-of-fact air which suggested that, in their opinion, they were doing nothing out of the common. And perhaps in that genial portion of the world from which they came such butcheries were the everyday events of their lives. The tall man issued some curt instructions. The two shorter ones set about gathering the papers which were scattered about the room and piling them in a heap beneath a table. On these they placed more or less inflammable fragments of my solider belongings. It seemed to be their intention to have a bonfire on lines of their own. Unless they were acquainted with a trick or two in that direction, as well as in others, how they proposed to keep it alight after ignition, one was at a loss to understand. About the procedure of the principal villain there was no such room for doubt. There was a frankness in his proceedings which caused me now to shriek at him in half-imbecile because wholly impotent rage, and now to shut my eyes in terror of what he might be doing next. By way of a commencement he took from some receptacle in his clothing what turned out to be a curiously shaped lamp. This he placed on the table at Miss Purvis's feet. Having lit it by the commonplace means of a match from a box of mine which was on the mantelpiece, he threw on it at short intervals what was probably some variation of what firework vendors described as coloured fire. The result was that surrounding objects assumed unusual hues, and the room was filled with a vapour which was not only obscuring but malodorous. From his bosom he produced an evil-looking knife. Laying a defiling hand upon his victim's throat, partly by sheer force, partly by the aid of his knife, he tore her garments open nearly to the waist. Bending her over, he seemed to be marking out some sort of design with the point of his blade on the bare skin in the region of her heart. Drawing himself upright, he suffered his voluminous sleeves to fall back, and bared his arms as a surgeon might do prior to commencing an operation. Then he leaned over her again, his knife held out. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of The Joss, a Reversion. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Narrated by Christopher Walters. The Joss, a Reversion. By Richard Marsh. Chapter 24. The God Out of the Machine. How it all happened I have but a misty notion. My eyelids were twitching, my eyes were neither shut nor open. I could not look, nor hide from myself the knowledge of what was being done. I saw the silent woman, the whiteness of her flesh, the gleam of steel, the tall figure stooping over her. There were the attendant demons, one on either side. All was still. My voice had perished, I could no longer utter a sound, and all that was done by the man with the knife was done in silence. So acute was the stillness I listened for the entry of the steel into the flesh, as if that were audible. Then, on a sudden, all was pandemonium. Of the exact sequence in which events occurred I have, as I have said, but a shadowy impression. Something struck the fellow with the knife full in the face. What it was at the moment I could not tell. I learned afterwards that it was a soft, peaked sailor's cap, thrown by a strong wrist with unerring aim. The impact was not a silent one. Taken unawares, the tall man staggered. He had been hit clean between the eyes. He put his hand up to his face as if bewildered. Before he had it down again, he had been seized by the shoulders, flung to the ground, and the knife wrenched from him. His assailant was Captain Lander. "Lander!" I gasped. The captain glanced in my direction, then at the woman stretched upon the table, then at the gentleman upon the floor. Him he appeared to recognize.
So it's you, is it? What devil's work have you been up to now? This is not Tonkin. Look out there! Stop 'em, my lads!
The attendant demons, perceiving that a change had come over the spirit of the scene, were making for the window, judging, doubtless, discretion to be the better part of valor. I then learned that Captain Lander was not alone. He had 3 companions. These made short work of stopping the flight of the ingenious colleagues. One of the captain's companions, a man of somewhat remarkable build, gripping the pair by the nape of the neck by either hand, banged their heads together. It was a spectacle which I found agreeable to behold. The long gentleman was rising from the ground. The captain assisted him by dragging him up by the shoulder. They observed each other with looks which were not looks of love. The captain jeered,
"So we've met again, have we? It seems as if you and I were bound to meet. We must be fond of one another."
The other replied with the retort discourteous, "You dog! You thief! You accursed!" He seemed to be nearly beside himself with rage, which under the circumstances was perhaps not surprising. The words apparently conveyed a taunt which drove the man to madness. Forgetful of the disparity which existed between them, and how little he was the captain's match, he flung himself at him with the unreflecting fury of some wild cat. Lander laughed. Putting his arms about the frantic man with a grin, he compressed them tighter and tighter till I half expected to see him squeeze the life right out. When he relaxed his hold, the other had had enough. Tottering back against the wall, he leaned against it, breathless. I had supposed his face to be a mask, incapable of expression, but perceived my error when I noted the glances with which he regarded his late antagonist. Careful of how the other might be observing him, Lander, with a few quick touches of the tall gentleman's own knife, released the girl, who had already in very truth tasted of the bitterness of death. Seeing the gag, he withdrew it with a tenderness which was almost feminine. His own coat he threw over her shoulders. A tremor passed all over her. She raised herself a little, and then with a sigh sank back upon the table. As if satisfied that with her all would be now well, Lander turned to me. In a moment my bonds were severed.
"Why, Mr. Payne, how come you in this galley?"
"That is more than I can tell. Is the lady badly hurt?"
"Not she. She'll be all right in a minute. I came just in time."
He uttered an exclamation on perceiving the sailor-man, Luke, bound at my side.
"Why, it's the Apostle! Lads, here's our friend Luke, the trusty soul, tied hand and foot just like a common cur, and gagged as well. Mr. Luke, this is an unexpected pleasure. We'll have the gag out at any rate, if only for the sake of hearing your dear old tongue start wagging. I hope that didn't hurt you. You must excuse a little roughness for our old acquaintance, but I think we'll leave you tied." Mr. Luke seemed to experience as much difficulty in recovering the faculty of speech as I had done. Stammering words came from his bleeding lips. "Then, in the case you'd better kill me." "No, we won't kill you, not just yet. Though I would have killed you out of hand if I could have got within reach of you, you know when. On second thoughts, I fancy we'll untie you. Pray tell, Mr. Luke, where's the great Joss now?"
Mr. Luke was stretching his limbs gingerly, apparently finding the process anything but an agreeable one. "That's what I want to know," he mumbled.
"No? Is that so? You done too? Poor Luke! How sad to think your confidence should have been misplaced. It's a treacherous world." The captain turned to me. "Mr. Payne, I believe you are the only person who can give us precise information as to the present whereabouts of the great Joss."
"I?" I stared at him, amazed.
"Yes, you. I'll tell you why I think so."
End of chapter 24.
Chapter 25 of The Joss, a Reversion. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Xanta. The Joss, a Reversion, by Richard Marsh. Book 4. Captain Max Lander sets forth the curious adventure which marked the voyage of the Flying Scud. Chapter 25. Luke's Suggestion. I've no faith in your old wives' tales. Not I. But the luck was against us. Everything went wrong from the first, and there's no getting away from the fact that we sailed on a Friday. The weather in the bay was filthy. Our engines went wrong in the Red Sea. We lay up at Aden for a week. There was a bill as long as my arm to pay. Then, when we got out into the open, the weather began again. Never had such a run. It was touch and go for our lives. One night, halfway between Ceylon and Sumatra, I thought it was the end. We had more than another touch off the Philippines. By the time we reached Yokohama, we were a wreck. Nothing less. The ship ought to have been overhauled before we started, but the owners wouldn't see it. They insisted that a patch here and a coat of paint there would meet the case. But it didn't. Not by a deal. As we soon found. At Aden, after all, the engines had only been tinkered. They went wrong again before we had been 3 days out. The weather we had would have tried the best work that ever came out of an engineer's shop. Those nailed-together pieces of rusty scrap iron worried the lives right out of us. If we had gone to the bottom, they would have been to blame. We were late at Yokohama. A lot. The agents didn't like it, nor the consignees either. There were words. After all I'd gone through, I wasn't in a mood to take a jacketing for what wasn't any fault of mine. So I let them see. The result was that there were all-round ructions. I admit that, under severe provocation, I did go farther than I intended. And I did not mean to knock old Lawrence down. But it was only by the mercy of God I had brought the ship into port at all. And it was hard lines to meet nothing but black looks and words, because I hadn't performed the impossible. Lawrence resented my knocking him down. David Lawrence was our agent, a close-fisted, cantankerous Scotchman. I own I ought to have kept my hands off him. But when he started bully-ragging me on my own deck, before the crew, as if I was something lower than a cabin boy, when I had had about enough of it, which wasn't long, I let fly. And over he went. I was sorry directly afterwards. And when he gave me to understand that not a ha'porth of stuff should come aboard that boat while I was in command, I swallowed the bile and started to apologize. Not much good came of that. As soon as my nose was inside his office, he began rubbing me the wrong way. The end of it was that I nearly knocked him down again, and should have, quite, if his clerks hadn't kept me off him. After that I knew the game was up. I knew that nothing worth having would come my way at Yokohama. I got drunk for the first time in my life. The ship was eating her head off for port dues. I slipped her moorings and ran out to sea. What I was to do I had not the faintest notion. I was perfectly well aware that I might as well sink her where she was as to take her back as good as empty. If I didn't lose my certificate, it would be no further use to me, because that would be the last command I should ever have. I took her to Hong Kong on the off chance of picking something up. But, as I had half expected, news of the Flying Scud had travelled ahead. There was nothing but the cold shoulder waiting for me all along the line. I did get a few odds and ends, but nothing worth speaking of, and I cleared out of Hong Kong for the same reason I had cleared out of Yokohama. Yet, though I should scarcely have thought it possible, there was worse to follow. The men, like their captain, were in a bad temper, which was not to be wondered at. They were pretty near to mutiny. If they got all the way, I should be landed indeed. Not that I minded. I was beyond that. I slept with one loaded revolver under my head and another in my hand. Possibly a bit of a scrimmage would have had the same effect on me as a little bloodletting. I should have been the better for it afterwards. I confess I did not know where I was going. I crawled along the Chinese coast with some dim idea of gaining time. Given time, I might be able to form some sort of reasonable plan. One thing was sure, I had no intention of going home to be ruined. If that was to be the way of it, I could be ruined just as well where I was. Better, perhaps. I sneaked through the Hainan Strait. A day or two after, we ran out of water. Just where we were I am not prepared to say. That's the truth. No lies. The coast was strange to me. I know the China Seas perhaps as well as a good many men, but I had never been in the Gulf of Tonkin before. I will say this, we were not 1,000 miles from Lien Chau. We were still hugging the coast when they told me the stores were out. I ordered them to take her in as close as she could be got. A little delay, more or less, didn't matter a snap of the fingers to me. I had got as far that. Considering we weren't over cold, it was pretty far. It was a lovely evening, a Friday, as it happened. I must have been born on a Friday. In about a couple of hours the sun would be setting, so, if we were quick, there would be time to get something aboard before the night was on us. And quick would have to be the word, because, in the forecastle, they had reached pretty nearly their last biscuit. I am not excusing myself. I own I could not have managed worse if I had tried. I knew all along the stores were running short. I had refused to refit at Hong Kong out of pure cussedness. What I said was that if the lubbers wouldn't ship their cargo, I wouldn't buy their stores. And I didn't. I meant to take in fresh supplies when we had a chance. We had not had a chance as yet. But now that we had come down to nothing, it was clear that we must get something, if it was only enough to take us along for a day or two. Fortunately, the sea was calm, the anchorage good. We were able to run close in. Directly a boat was lowered, the men started off as if they were rowing for grub stakes, which they were. So far as I could see, the country thereabouts was uninhabited. If that was the case, it was a poor lookout for us. But as it was a shelving shore, with trees crowning the crest as far as the eye could reach, it was possible that both houses and people might be close at hand, though hidden from sight. Which, if I wished to avoid further trouble, was a state of things devoutly to be desired. I saw the boat reach land, men get out of it, climb the slope, disappear from view. And then, for more than 3 mortal hours, I saw no more of them. It was pretty tedious waiting. Every man Jack on board kept a keen lookout. Discipline was not so good as it might have been, for reasons. There was no conspicuous attempt, as the minutes crept slowly by, to conceal the apparently general impression that it was a case of bunk, that those sailor-men had thought it better to throw in their lot with the natives of those parts rather than to continue the voyage with me. At the bottom of my boots I felt that if such was the fact, it was not for me to say that they were fools. However, it proved not to be the fact. Some time after darkness had fallen, just as I was concluding that it would perhaps be as well to send a second boat in search of the first, and take command of it myself, boat number 1 returned. It was greeted with language which might be described as hearty. They had had some luck, brought something in the victual line. Without any reference to my authority, a raid was made on what they had brought. I said nothing, not caring what they did. If they wanted to keep themselves alive, what did it matter to me? The boat had been in command of a man named Luke. At Yokohama I had had a few words with the first mate, and sent him packing. At Hong Kong there was a difference of opinion with the second. He went after the first. As the third fancied himself ill, and thought he'd try the hospital ashore for a change, it looked as if we were going to be under-officered. There was a handy man aboard who called himself Luke. Just Luke. I didn't know much about him. What I did know I didn't altogether like. But, as I say, he was a handy man. One of those chaps who can drive an engine or trim a sail. He knew something about navigation. Said he had a mate's certificate, but I never saw it, and never had any reason to believe anything he said. Anyhow, being in a bit of a hole, I took his word for it, and first mate he was appointed. Some little time after he'd come aboard, I was sitting in my cabin, feeling as usual like murder or suicide, when there was a tapping at the door. It was Luke.
Begging pardon, Captain, but can I have a word with you?
Have 2. He had 3, and more. He stood looking at me in the furtive, sneaking way he always had, twiddling his cap with his fingers like a forecastle hand.
Excuse me, Captain, but I don't fancy as how you've been overmuch in luck this trip.
My dear Mr. Luke, whatever can have caused you to imagine a thing like that?
Well, it's pretty obvious, ain't it?
He grinned. I could have broken his head. Is it for the purpose of imparting that information that I am indebted to the pleasure of your presence here?
Well, no, it ain't.
He scraped his jaw with his hand, as if to feel if it wanted shaving, which it did.
The fact is, I shouldn't be surprised if you chanced upon a bit of luck still, if you liked.
If I liked? You're a man of humour.
It's this way.
He hesitated, as if doubtful as to the advisability of telling me which way it was.
It all depends upon whether you'd care to run a trifle of risk.
After what I've gone through, it'd have to be a pretty big trifle of risk which would prevent me snatching a chestnut out of the fire.
That's what I thought.
He cleared his throat. Get on, man, get on.
It's this way.
You've said it's this way, but you haven't said which way.
There's a, we'll say, party as wants a passage to England. Bad.
Where is this party?
Over there.
He nodded his head in the direction of the shore. Who is this party?
That's where it is. He's a Joss.
A Joss? What do you mean? What are you grinning at? Don't try to play any of your damn fool jokes with me. I'm not taking any.
It's no joke, Captain. It's dead earnest. The party is a Joss, and that's where it is.
What do you mean by a Joss?
It seems that a Joss is a sort of a kind of a god of the country, as it were.
Luke's grin became more cavernous. Are you suggesting that we should raid a temple? Is that what you're after?
Well, no, not quite that. This party, although a Joss, is an Englishman.
An Englishman?
Yes, an Englishman. And having had enough of being a Joss, he wants to get back to his native land. England, home and beauty, and that kind of thing. And he's willing to pay high for getting there.
Where's the risk?
Well, it seems that the people in these parts think a good deal of him, and they don't care to have their gods and such like cut their luck whenever they think they will. Besides, he wouldn't want to come empty-handed.
How do you mean? Luke glanced around as if searching for unseen listeners. His voice sank.
I didn't manage to get more than half a dozen words, as it might be, with the party in question.
How did you manage to get those? The dear man's face assumed a crafty look.
Well, it was a kind of accident, as it were, but that is neither here nor there. From what I'm told, there's a slap-up temple on the other side of the hill, what's crammed with the offerings of the faithful. This here party's been a good time in the neighbourhood, and through their thinking a lot of him, as I've said, they've brought him heaps and heaps of presents. It's them he wants to take away with him.
If they're his, who's to say him no?
Well, there's a lot of other coves about the temple, and they won't allow they are his. Anyhow, they'd raise hell and Tommy if they knew he thought of taking them to England.
I see. As I supposed at first, it's a big steal you're after.
It's hardly fair to call it that, Captain. The things are his. It's only those other blokes' cussed greediness.
It is that way sometimes. One man says things are his, which other people claim, then, poor beggar, he gets locked up because they are so grasping. What is he disposed to pay for taking him and his belongings?
Just whatever you choose to ask.
In Luke's eyes, as they met mine, there was a peculiar meaning. Then he'll find his passage an expensive one.
I don't think you'll find there'll be any trouble about that. You get him and his safe to England, and I shouldn't be surprised but what you'd find, Captain, that you'd made a good voyage after all. The only thing is, there's no time to be lost. He's in a hurry. He's not so young as he was, and he's about as sick of this neighbourhood as he can be.
He can come aboard at once if he likes.
Well, that would be sharp work, wouldn't it? But I don't know that it can be done quite so quick as that. You see, there's a good deal of stuff, and it's got to be got away, and without any fuss. But I tell you what, Captain, he would like to have a word with you, if so be as you wouldn't mind.
Where is he? Did you bring him with you in the boat?
No, I didn't do that. He ain't a party as can go where, when, and how he likes. There's eyes upon him all the time, and there's other things. But I do know where he's to be found, and I did go so far as to say that if so be you was willing, I'd bring you straight back to him right away, and then you might talk things over. I did make so bold as to go as far as that.
Do you wish me to understand that he's waiting for me now?
Well, that's about the size of it.
I'll come. I went. End of chapter 25. Recording by Xanta. Chapter 26 of The Joss, a Reversion. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Xanta. The Joss, a Reversion, by Richard Marsh. Chapter 26. The Throne in the Centre. Never shall I forget that row in the moonlight. It was one of those clear, soft, mysterious nights which one sometimes gets in those latitudes, when the air seems alive with unseen things. One's half shy of talking for fear of being overheard. I'm no hand at description, but those who have been in those parts know the sort of night I mean. I was not in a romantic mood, God knows. Nor, so far as I could see, was there much of romance about the expedition. But I had been brooding, till things had got into my blood. As I sat there in the boat, I felt as if I were moving through a world of dream. We had brought a funny crowd. At the back of my mind, and I felt sure at the back of Luke's, was the feeling that if the thing had to be done at all, then the quicker it was done, the better. It was a case of taking time by the forelock. The Flying Scud had a ragged crew. The Lord alone could tell what was the nationality of most of them. Out of the bunch we had picked the best. There was the chief engineer, Isaac Rudd. He had shipped with me before. I knew him, and that he wouldn't stick at a trifle. A man who had had to wrestle with such engines as ours wasn't likely to. In a manner of speaking, he was as deep in the ditch as I was, because if things had gone wrong, his share of the blame was certainly equal to mine. If there was a chance of levelling up, then we were both about as eager to snatch at it. Then there was Holly, Sam Holly, whom I had made second mate. Though he was a fat man with a squeaky voice, I was hoping there were not too many soft streaks in him. There was his chum, Bill Cox, the very antipodes of himself, a shriveled-up little fellow with a voice like a big bassoon. Those two always went together. Lord knows who the rest were. Though I had a kind of an inkling that Luke had done his best to see there were no shirkers, I had not breathed a syllable about the game we were after. But Luke might have dropped a hint. There was that about the fellows which to me smelt like business. And I felt sure that each man had about him somewhere something which would come in handy to fight with. Still, I knew nothing about that. The impression I had wished to convey was that we were enjoying a little moonlight excursion, and that if anything was about, it was peace and mercy. We reached shore. I spoke to them as Luke and I were getting out. "You chaps will stay here. Mr. Holly, you'll be in command and see that there's no roving. Mr. Rudd, you will come with us to the top of the hill. Mr. Luke and I are going to see a friend on a little matter of business. If you hear a double catcall, or the sound of firearms, or anything that makes you think that we're not altogether enjoying ourselves, you pass the word at once. Then you chaps will come on for all you're worth. Leave one man in charge of the boat. That's all." We then went up the slope. At the top we left Rudd, with a final tip from me to keep his eyes skinned and his ears open. Luke and I plunged right away into what seemed to me to be a trackless forest. How he could find his way in it, considering he had only been there once in his life before, and then in broad daylight, was beyond my understanding. But there were one or two things about St. Luke which I couldn't make out, either then or afterwards. Anyhow, he forged his way ahead as if he had been used to the place from his cradle up. Never seemed puzzled for a moment. Presently we reached an open space. The moon shone down so that it was as light as day. Only there was a fringe of outer darkness all around. Luke made a queer noise with his lips. I suppose it was some sort of bird he was imitating. He repeated it 3 times, with an interval between each. Then something came out of the darkness which took me all aback. It was a woman. When she first appeared she had something white over her, head and all. Coming close up to us, drawing the covering aside with a dexterous switch, she stood bareheaded. I stared in amazement. I had not known there were such women in the world. I stammered to Luke, "Who's this?" To my astonishment she answered, in English 1,000 times better than mine. It was a treat to listen to her. "It is I." Off came my cap in a twinkling. "I beg your pardon. I had no idea I was to meet a lady." "A lady? Am I a lady?" "Yes." She laughed. She alone knew what at. Such laughter. "I am Susan." Susan! She was as much a Susan as I was a Jupiter. I said then, and I say now, and I shall keep on saying, she was the loveliest creature I had ever seen, even in, I won't say dreams, because I don't dream, but in pictures. She was straight as a mast, carried herself as if she were queen of the earth, which she was. Yet with a dainty grace for which bewitching charm was beyond anything I had ever imagined. And her eyes, they were like twin moons in a summer sky. As I looked at her, every nerve in my body tingled. She added, since she saw me speechless,
I am the daughter of the gods.
That was better. She was that. The daughter of the gods, as she put it herself. I could have dropped at her feet and worshipped. But she went on.
You are from the ship? You are the captain?
I am Max Lander.
Max Lander?
She repeated my name in a sort of a kind of a way which made everything seem to swim before my eyes.
It is a good name. We shall be friends.
Friends. She held out her hands to me. As I took them into mine, Lord, how I shivered. I fancy she felt me shaking by the way she smiled. It made me worse, her smile did. She kept cool through it all.
Shall we not be friends?
My dear lady, I hope we shall. Talk about being at a loss for words. I could have poured out thousands. Only just then my dictionary had all its pages torn out, and I didn't know where to lay my hand upon one of them.
It is my father you have come to see.
Your father? I had forgotten what had brought me. Everything but the fact that she was standing there, in the moonlight, within reach of me, had passed from my mind. Her words brought me back to earth with a bang. Her father? Was it possible that I had come to see her father? She, the daughter of the gods? What manner of man must be her sire? I stuttered and I stammered. I didn't understand. I'd come to see your father.
He is the great Joss.
The great Joss? What on earth did she mean? What was a Joss, anyhow, great or little? I had heard of Joss sticks, though I only had a hazy notion what they were. But a real live Joss, who could be the father of such a daughter, was a new kind of creature altogether. She offered no explanation.
He waits for you. I am here to bring you to him. Come.
She fluttered off among the trees. "Luke," I whispered as we followed, "this is not at all the sort of thing I was prepared for." "She's a fine piece, ain't she?" A fine piece? To apply his coarse Whitechapel slang to such a being, it was unendurable. I could have knocked him down. Only I thought that, just then, I had better not. I preserved silence instead. It was like a page out of a fairy tale. We followed the enchanted princess through the wood of wonders. The gleaming of her snow-white robes was all we had to guide us. Shafts of light shot down upon her through the trees. When they struck her, she shone like silver. She moved swiftly through the forest, out of the darkness into the light, then into the dark again. No sound marked her passing. She sped on noiseless feet, while Luke struggled clumsily after her. She took us perhaps a quarter of a mile. Even as we went, I wondered if Isaac Rudd upon the hilltop would hear us, should we find ourselves in want of aid. How help would reach us if he did? One would need to be highly endowed with the instinct of locality to follow us by the way which we had come. A rendezvous hidden in a primeval forest, as this one seemed to be, might not be found easy of access by any sailor-man. She stopped, waiting till we came close up to her.
It is here. Be careful. There is a step.
It was only when she opened a door, and I perceived the shimmer of a dim light beyond, that I realized that we were standing in the shadow of some kind of building. The darkness had seemed to be growing more opaque. Here was the explanation. If it had not been for her, we should have knocked our heads against the wall. Nothing betrayed its neighbourhood, not a light, not a sound. If it had been placed there, cheek by jowl with the towering trees, with the intent of concealing its existence as much as possible from the eyes of men, the design had been well conceived and carried out. At night no one would suspect its presence. How it would be by day I could not tell. I doubted if it would be much more obvious then. It was no hut. As I glanced above me, it seemed to be of huge proportions. Its blackness soared up and up like some grim nightmare. What could it be? Our guide entered. I followed. Luke brought up the rear. It was some seconds before I began to even faintly understand what kind of place it was which we were in. Then I commenced to realize that it must be some kind of heathen temple. Its vastness amazed me. Whether it was or was not exaggerated by the prevailing semi-darkness, I could not positively determine. To me it seemed to be monstrous. Height, breadth, length, all were lost in shadows. Wherever I looked, I could not see the end. Only a haunting impression of illimitable distance. The door by which we had entered was evidently a private one. There was only space for one at a time to pass. To such an edifice there must have been another entrance to permit of the passage of large crowds, though I could not guess in which direction it might be. Columns rose on every hand. I had a notion that they were of varied colours, covered with painted carvings, but whether they were of wood, stone, or metal I could not say. Their number added an extra touch of bewilderment. One gazed through serried lines and lines of columns which seemed to bridge the gathering shadows with the outer darkness which was beyond. Until our guide moved more towards the centre of the building, with us at her heels, I did not understand where the light which illumined the place came from. It proceeded from what I suppose was the altar, the high altar. A queer one it was, and imposing to boot. Anyhow, seen in that half-light, with us coming on it unprepared, and not expecting anything of the kind, it was imposing, and something more. I don't mind owning that I had a queer feeling about my back, just as if someone had squeezed an unexpected drop of water out of a sponge and it was going trickling down my spine. There was some fascinating representations of what one could only trust were not common objects of the seashore. These were of all sizes, some several times as large as life, and one fervently hoped 100 times less natural. They stood for originals which, so far as my knowledge of physiology goes, are to be found neither in the sea or under it, on the earth or over it, or anywhere adjacent. The powers be thanked. They were monsters, just that, and would have been excellent items in a raving madman's ideal freak museum. Anywhere else they were out of place. There was one sweet creature which particularly struck my fancy. It was some 14 or 15 feet high, and was about all mouth. Its mouth was pretty wide open. It would have made nothing of swallowing a Jonah, and was fitted with a set of teeth which were just the thing to scrunch his bones. These pretty deers were arranged in a semicircle, each on a stand of its own. The small ones were outside. They grew bigger as they went on, until, by the time you reached the biggest in the middle, if you were a drinking man, you were ready to turn teetotaler at sight. The hues they were decked in were enough to make you envy the colour-blind. Coming on this livening collection without the slightest notice, in that great black mystery of a place, with just light enough to let them hit you in the eye, and hidden in the darkness you knew not what besides, was a bit trying to the nerves. At least it was to mine, and I am not generally accounted a nervous subject. The strangest thing of all was in the centre. I stared at it, and stared. Yet I couldn't make out what it was. It was on a throne. If it wasn't gold, it looked like it. It was large enough for 6 men, standing high. Right in the middle, flanked by the biggest pair of monsters, their seat was on a level with the tops of their heads. It was approached by a flight of steps, each step apparently of different coloured stone. Coloured lamps were hung above and about it. One noticed how, in the draughty air, they were swinging to and fro. From these proceeded all the light that was in the place, except that here and there upon the steps were queer-shaped vessels, seemingly of copper, in which something burned, flashing up now and then in changing hues, like Bengal lights. From them, I judged, proceeded the sickly smell which made the whole place like a pest-house, and the smoke was horrid. In the very centre of the throne was something, though what I could not make out. It seemed immobile, yet there was that about it which suggested life. The face and head were as hideous as any of the horrors round about, and yet could the thing be human? Long, party-coloured hair, scarlet, yellow, green, all sorts of unnatural colours, descending from the scalp, nearly obscured the visage. There seemed to be only one eye and no nose. If there were ears, they were hidden. Was it some obscene creature, or the mockery of a man? There were no signs of legs. The thing was scarcely more than 3 feet high. Being clad in a sort of close-fitting tunic, which was ablaze with what seemed diamonds, legs, if there had been any, could scarcely have been hidden. There was certainly nothing in the way of breeches. Arms, on the other hand, there were, and to spare. A pair dangled at the sides, which were longer than the entire creature. Huge hands were at the ends. While I gazed at this nightmare creation of some delirious showman's fancy, wondering if such a creature by any possibility could ever have had actual existence, that most beautiful woman in the world, who had brought us there, turned to me and said, as simply and as naturally as if she were remarking that she would take another lump of sugar in her tea,
"This is the great Joss, my father."
And Luke, clearing his throat, with an air half apologetic and half familiar, observed in a sort of husky groan, which I dare say he meant for a whisper, "Hello, Ben, my cockalorum bird. How goes it along with you, old son?" End of chapter 26. Recording by Xanta. Chapter 27 of The Joss, a Reversion. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Xanta. The Joss, a Reversion by Richard Marsh. Chapter 27. The Offerings of the Faithful. No notice was taken of Luke's inquiry. Instead, the whole place was filled all at once with a variety of discordant sounds. They seemed to proceed from the monsters which were ranged about the central figure. At the same time their arms began to move, their heads to waggle, their mouths to open and shut, their eyes to roll. Possibly, to the untaught savage, such an exhibition might have appeared impressive. It reminded me too much of the penny-in-the-slot figures whose limbs are set in motion by the insertion of a coin. The slight awe which I had felt for the figures vanished for good and all. "That's enough of it," I observed. "I like them better when they're still. Would whoever's pulling the strings mind taking a rest?" I had a sort of a kind of an idea that by someone or other my remark was not relished so much as it deserved. A suspicion that in some quarter there was a feeling of resentment that what had been intended to confound me should have ended in a fizzle. The noises stopped. The figures ceased to move. It was as if the coin in the slot had given us our pennyworth. Instead, something which, from my point of view, was very much more objectionable began to happen. From the immediate neighbourhood of the figure on the throne, snakes' heads began to peep. There was no mistake that they were all alive-o. The evil-looking brutes began to slither over the sides. I never could abide snakes, either in a figurative or a literal sense. The mere sight of one puts my dander up. Whipping a couple of revolvers out of my coat pockets, I headed the muzzles straight for them. Someone had better call those pretty darlings off before I shoot the eyes clean out of their heads. To my surprise, the warning was immediately answered.
"You'd better not shoot at them, my lad, or you'll be sorry."
The words came from the creature on the throne. "So, you are alive, are you? You'd better call them off, or I'll shoot first and be sorry after."
"They're not touching you, you fool."
"No, and I'm not going to wait until they are." The things were coming unpleasantly close, their approach setting every nerve in my body on edge. In another second or two I would have fired. Luke caught me by the arm. "Gently, Captain, gently. The snakes won't hurt you. Our friend won't let them. It's only his way. Captain, let me introduce you to my old friend, Mr. Benjamin Batters. My friend and me haven't seen each other for years. Have we, Ben?"
"Can't say I ever wanted to see you."
"Just so, just so. Still, friends do meet again. Ben, this is Captain Lander."
"He doesn't seem to know his proper place."
"When I glance in your direction, Mr. Batters, I'm inclined to make the same remark of you."
"Damn the man."
The creature proved himself to be very much alive by seizing one of the serpents in his huge hands and whirling it above his head as if it had been a club. Luke played the part of peacemaker. "Now, gentlemen. Come, Ben, no offence was meant, I'm sure. Tell the captain what you want. He's in rather a hurry, Captain Lander is."
"Then let him go to the devil and take his hurry with him."
"By all means. I wish you good evening, Mr. Batters." I swung round on my heels. The creature screamed after me.
"Stop, you fool, stop! I'm the Joss, the great Joss, the greatest god this country's ever known. In my presence all men fall upon their knees and worship me."
"Let 'em. Tastes differ. I like my gods to be built on other lines." I expected to be attacked by a shower of execration, but the creature changed his mood.
"And I'm sick of being a god. Sick of it. Dead sick. Curse your Josses is what I say. Damn 'em."
There followed a flood of adjectives.
I want to get out of the place, to turn my back upon the whole infernal land, to never set eyes on it again. I'm an Englishman, that's what I am, an Englishman, British born and British bred. I want to get back to my native land. Captain Lander, or whatever your cursed name is, will you take me back to England?
When?
Now, at once, tonight.
I do not carry passengers. I doubt if I have proper accommodation. What will you give me for taking you?
I'll show you what I'll give you.
The creature scrambled off his throne by means of his arms and hands, like some huge baboon. As I had suspected, he appeared to have no legs. Reaching the ground, he moved at what, under the circumstances, was an extraordinary pace. Wheels had been attached to the stumps of his legs. Using his hands as a monkey does its forearms, he advanced upon these wheels as if they had been casters. As we followed him, Luke whispered in my ear,
"You mustn't mind what he says. He's a bit off his chump, poor chap."
From what I can see, there seems to be a bit off him elsewhere besides the chump.
"Oh, he's lived a queer life. Been cut to pieces, stewed in oil, and I don't know what. He's a tough 'un. It's a miracle he's alive. I thought he was dead years ago. When I first knew him, he was a finer man than me."
Mr. Batters had brought us to an apartment which seemed to be used as a repository for the treasures of the temple. The room was not a large one, but it was as full as it could hold. Curios were on every hand. Trading in eastern seas, I had seen something of things of the kind. I knew that those I saw there had value. There were images, ornaments, vessels of all sorts and shapes and sizes, apparently of solid gold. He lifted the lid of a lacquered case.
"You see that? That's dust, gold dust. There are more than 20 cases full of it, worth at least £1,000 apiece. You see those?"
He was holding up another box for my inspection.
"Those are diamonds, rubies, pearls, sapphires, opals, and turquoises."
"Real?"
"Real!"
he screamed.
"They're priceless, unique. They're offerings which the faithful have made to me, the great Joss. They come from men and women who are the greatest and the richest in the land. Do you think they would dare to offer me imitations? If they were guilty of such sacrilege, I would destroy them root and branch, and they know it."
The creature snarled like some great cat.
"Ha ha! I know something of stones, and I tell you, you won't find finer gems in any jeweller's shop in London, nor any as fine."
He waved his arms.
"You won't match the things you see here in all Europe, not in kings' palaces, nor in national museums. I know, and I tell you. If all the things you see in this place were put up in a London auction room for sale tomorrow, they'd fetch more than £1 million, down on the nail. I swear they would. If you'll take me with you to England tonight, me and my daughter here, this is my daughter, Susan. She's her father's only child."
The irony of it! My stars! A shudder went all over me as I thought of her being connected by ties of blood with such an object.
"If you'll give the pair of us ship room and all these things, they're all my property, every pin's worth, all offerings to the great Joss. You and your crew shall have half of everything you see. That shall be in payment of our passage."
Half! My mouth watered. His appraisement of the value of the things I saw about me went to all intents and purposes unheeded. Divide his figures by 20. Say their worth was £50,000. Half of that, even after I and Luke and Rudd and the rest of them had had their pickings, and out of a venture of this sort pickings there would have to be, the remnant would still leave a handsome profit for the owners. I knew the kind of men with whom I had to deal. Only give them a sufficient profit, I need not fear of being placed in their black books. However it might have come. And then there was half that collection of gems. I would have that too, and half the gold dust. Ye whales and little fishes, this might yet turn out the most profitable voyage I'd ever made. Yet I easily perceived that there might be breakers ahead. "You say that all these things are yours?"
"Every one, every speck of gold dust, all, all. I am the only great Joss. They have been given to me."
"Then, in that case, there will be no difficulty in removing them." The response came brusquely enough, and to the point.
"That's where you're a fool. Do you suppose I'd share the plunder if there weren't? If it was known that I was going to make myself scarce, let alone hooking off with this lot of goods, there'd be hell to pay. I haven't stayed here all this time because I wanted. I had to. They made of me the thing you see, cut me to pieces, boiled, burned, and baked me, skinned me alive. Then they dipped me in a paint-pot and made of me a god. The next thing they'll make of me'll be a corpse. I can't stand being pulled about with red-hot pincers like I used to. There's 100 adjectived priests about this adjectived show. They all want to have a finger in my pie. When I had a word with Luke here, and arranged with him to have a word with you, I sent the whole damned pack off, miracle-working, at a place 6 miles away from here. We'll have to be cleared off before they're back, or they'll be fighting. They can fight. And the man who falls into their hands alive, before they've done with him, will curse his mother for ever having borne him.
How do you propose to go? Walk?
Walk!
He laughed, a laugh which wasn't nice to hear.
I haven't walked for 20 years, since they burned my legs off so that I shouldn't. When the great Joss goes abroad, he travels in his palanquin. There it is. And as he passes, the people throw themselves onto the ground and hide their faces in the dust, lest, at the sight of his godlike form, they should fall dead. You'll have to fetch your chaps, and be quick about it. They'll have to carry me, and I'll stuff the palanquin as full as it will hold with the things which are best worth taking. I know 'em.
I reflected for a moment, then turned to Luke. Do you think you can find your way to Rudd? The girl interposed.
Let me go. I shall be surer and quicker.
You can't go alone. They won't take their orders from you. An idea occurred to me. I'll come with you, and we'll take as many things with us as we can carry. Luke, you stay behind and help Mr. Batters put the things together in convenient parcels. I doubt if there'll be enough of us to take everything. Pick out the best. As time's precious, what we can't take we shall have to leave behind. I crammed my pockets with the smaller odds and ends, none the less valuable, perhaps, because they were small. I packed a lot of other things into a sort of sheet which I slung over my shoulder. The girl stowed as much as she could carry into the skirt of her queer-fashioned gown. She held it up as children do their pinafores. Out we went into the night. As we hurried along, my breath came faster even than the pace warranted, at the thought of being alone in the darkness with her. We went some way before a word was spoken. Then I asked a question. Do you want to go to England?
Want?
She gave a sigh, as of longing.
I have wanted ever since I was born.
Then you shall go, whoever has to stay behind.
Stay behind? How do you mean?
She seemed to read in my words a hidden significance.
My father must go. If he stays, I stay also.
Is he really your father?
Of course he is my father. My mother was one of the women of the country. They burned her when I was born.
Burned her?
As a thank-offering for having borne unto the great Joss a child.
She spoke in the most matter-of-fact tone. I wondered what sort of place this was I had got into, whether the people hereabouts were men or demons. She went on quietly.
My father is the great Joss. It was a great thing to the people that a woman should have borne him a child.
A child who was a goddess. I was ashamed of myself directly the words were uttered. It seemed to be taking an unfair advantage to say things to her like that, but she didn't seem to mind.
A goddess? That is what men worship.
Just so, that is what men worship. She laughed to herself softly, so that only I, who was close at her side, could hear. There was that in the sound which set my blood on fire.
If I am a goddess, whom you worship, then you must be a god, and I must worship you. Shall it be?
I did not answer. Whether she was playing with me, I could not tell. I knew all the while that it was just as likely. But there was something in the question, and in the way in which she asked it, which put all my senses in confusion. It was a wonder I didn't come a dozen times to the ground. My wits were wandering. We exchanged not another syllable. I had lost my tongue. As we neared Rudd, he challenged us. "Who comes there?" "It's all right, Rudd, it's I." He was plainly surprised at the sight of my companion, but, being a discreet soul, asked no questions. Perhaps he had already concluded, being quite capable of drawing deductions on his own account, that queer things were in the air. "Stay where you are. I shall be back in a minute, and shall want you. I'm going to fetch the men out of the boat. There's a job of work on hand." We ran down the slope, found the boat where I had left it, deposited in it the things which we had brought away with us, no one offering a comment. As I unloaded I gave hurried instructions. In certainly not much more than the minute of which I had spoken to Rudd, we were starting back to him. 1 man we left in the boat. 5 we took with us. Of their quality in a scrimmage I knew nothing, but, as I had suspected, each had brought with him something with which to make his mark in case of ructions. If one might judge from their demeanour, the suggestion that there might be friction ahead seemed to give them satisfaction rather than otherwise. Especially when I added a hint that there was plunder to be got by those who cared to get it. They put no inconvenient inquiries. Whose property it might chance to be was their captain's affair, not theirs. For once, in a way, they recognized the force of the fact that it was theirs only to obey. All they wanted was a share of the spoil. End of chapter 27. Recording by Xanta. Chapter 28 of The Joss, a Reversion. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Xanta. The Joss, a Reversion, by Richard Marsh. Chapter 28. The Joss Reverts. We passed through the forest in single file, the girl first, I next, the men hard upon each other's heels. We found Luke apparently alone. I thought that the Joss had returned for some purpose to the temple. "What's he gone for?" I asked. Luke made a movement with his forefinger, suggesting caution. He spoke in a hoarse whisper.
"He's not gone. He's there, in the palanquin."
His voice sank lower.
"I rather fancy that he don't want to be looked at more than he can help. Poor chap. He feels that, to look at, he ain't the man as once he was."
Luke grinned. Sympathy did not go very deep with him. The palanquin was drawn out upon the floor. The girl stooped over it.
"Father!"
A voice proceeded from within, a surly voice.
"I'm here, all right. Don't let's have any nonsense. Tell 'em to be careful how they carry me. I don't want to be jolted to bits by a lot of awkward fools. They're to hurry for all that. Those devils may be back at any minute. We've arranged the things as best we can. Luke will tell them what's to be taken first."
Luke volunteered to be one of the palanquin bearers, suggesting that Isaac Rudd should be the other. Isaac glanced doubtfully towards me. "It's all right, Mr. Rudd. There's a friend of mine in there, an invalid, who is not able to walk very well over uneven ground. If you will assist Mr. Luke, I'll be obliged. You'll find that you'll be able to carry him very easily between you." Isaac expressed his willingness to lend a hand, though I could see that he still had his doubts as to what was in the palanquin. To be frank, I was doubtful too. I wondered what it contained besides Benjamin Batters. Luke and his friend, considering the short time they had had at their disposal, had put the goods into convenient form for transit. Some had been packed in wooden cases, some in bundles, some in sacks. Each man took as much as he could carry, inquiring of himself, I make no doubt, what it was that he was bearing. I took my share. The girl took hers. Luke and Rudd shouldered the palanquin, the second in front, the first behind, Luke taking up his position in the rear, so that he might the more easily, if necessary, hold communication with its occupant. The procession started. The girl was its guide, now in advance, now at the palanquin side holding converse with her father. I gathered from what I heard that he was not in the sweetest temper. Luke and Rudd were not practised bearers. The way was difficult, the light trying. Now and then one or the other would stumble. The palanquin was jolted. From its interior issued a curse which, if not loud, was deep and strong. We reached the open on the crest of the slope without interruption. I was beginning to conclude that, consciously or unconsciously, Batters had exaggerated the danger which would attend his attempt at flight. We had borne him away, if not in triumph, at least with impunity, looted the temple of its best belongings. No one had endeavoured to say us nay. It might be almost worth our while to return for what we had left behind. Actual peril there appeared to be none. No one seemed cognizant of what was going on, or seemed to care. If the temple itself had been portable, we might have carried it away entire. The result apparently would have been the same. Thinking such thoughts, I watched Luke and Rudd go swinging down the slope in the moonlight. I almost suspected them of intentional awkwardness. They treated that palanquin to such a continuous shaking. Its occupant must have been gripping the sides with his huge hands, or surely he would have been dislodged and shot onto the ground. With a stream of adjectives he enlivened the proceedings. Small blame to him, said I to myself. If jolting's good for the liver, as I've heard, he'll have had a good dose of the medicine before he's through. If swearing will make it easier, for the Lord's sake let him swear. And he swore. And right in the middle of about as full-flavoured a string of observations as I have ever heard, there arose a wild cry from the forest behind us. In a second the Joss's head appeared between the curtains.
Quick, quick! It's the devils! The devils!
It needed no urging from me, or from him either, to induce everyone concerned to quicken his pace. On a sudden, the forest, where, a moment back, had reigned the silence of the grave, was now alive with shouts and noises. People were shrieking. What sounded like drums were being banged. Guns were being fired. The great Joss's absence was discovered. Possibly the absence of a good deal of valuable property had been discovered too. The alarm was being given. The priests, those pious souls who had burned the girl's mother alive as a reward for having borne the great Joss a child, were warning the country far and wide of what had happened. In a few minutes the whole countryside would be upon us. I don't fancy the fighting instinct was very hot in any of us just then. There was something ominous about that din. We were few. The proceedings on which we were engaged might appear odd, regarded from a certain point of view. Fortunately, we were near the boat. As luck would have it, when he was within a dozen paces of the water's edge, Luke, tripping over a bush or something, dropped onto his knee. The palanquin, torn from Isaac's shoulders, descended to the ground with a crash. What were Mr. Batter's feelings I am unable to say. I expected to see him shot through the roof, like a jack-in-the-box. But he wasn't. So far as I could tell in the haste and confusion, he was silent, which was ominous. The girl sank down beside the fallen palanquin with the evident intention of offering words of comfort to her revered, though maltreated, parent. Before she had a chance of saying a word, Luke had righted himself. Rudd had regained possession of the end which he had lost. Mr. Batters inside might be dead. That was a matter of comparative indifference. No inquiries were made. Somehow the palanquin was being borne towards the boat. Of exactly what took place during the next few minutes I have only vague impressions. I know that the palanquin was got into the boat somehow, with the great Joss, or what was left of him, still inside. The men, disposing of their burdens anywhere or anyhow, began to get out their oars. I dropped my loot somewhere aft. The boat was got afloat. The girl, who had all at once got as frightened of the sea as a 2-year-old child, I lifted in my arms, carried through 3 feet of water, and put aboard. I followed. A wild-looking figure came tearing after us down the slope. There were others, but he was in front, and I noticed him particularly. He was a tall, thin old party, dressed in yellow, with a bald head, and a face that looked like a corpse's in the moonlight. It was yellow, like his dress. As wicked a physiognomy as ever I set eyes upon. He was in a towering rage. When he got down to the shore we were in deep water, perhaps 20 yards away. He seemed so anxious to get at us I expected to see him start swimming after us. Not a bit of it. I rather imagine that the people just thereabouts were not fond of water in any form. He refused to allow the sea to damp so much as the tips of his toes. He screamed at us instead, to my surprise, in English. Not bad English either. "The Joss! The great Joss! Give us back our Joss!" "Wouldn't you like it?" I returned. I wasn't over-civil, not liking his looks. I wondered if he had had a hand in burning the girl's mother. He looked that sort of man. He raised his hands above his head and cursed us. He looked a quaint figure, standing there in the moon's white rays. And ugly, too. Dangerous if he had a chance. His voice was not a loud one, but he had a trick of getting it to travel. "You dog! You thief! You accursed! You have stolen from us the great Joss. But do not think that you can keep him. Wherever you may take him, though it be across the black water, to the land beyond the sun, we will follow. He shall be ours again. As for you, the flesh shall fall from off you, the foul waters shall rot your bones, you shall stink, mocker of the gods." There was a good deal more of it. He continued his observations till we were out of hearing, repeating that he would follow us pretty well everywhere before he would allow that great Joss to be a bad debt. Though he was a barbarian and loose in his geography, it struck me that he meant what he said. If he could have laid his hands on me, and have had me in a position where I couldn't have laid mine on him, I should have had a nice little experience before he'd done. That was the kind of mood he was in. Long before he had said all that he had to say, he was joined by quite a crowd. When he had about cursed himself out, he started on a funny little entertainment of another kind. He made a fire close down by the sea. His friends formed about it in a circle. He stood in the centre. As the flames rose and fell, he dropped things on them. Stuff which smoked and burned in different colours. The sort of rubbish which boys in England buy in ha'porths and penn'orths and make themselves a nuisance with. Possibly, out there it costs more, so is thought a lot of. As he put his rubbish on his fire, his friends moved round first one way and then the other, behaving themselves generally like fantastic idiots. And he threw himself into attitudes which would have been a photographer's joy. I had an impression that he was calling down the wrath of the gods upon our heads, and doing it in style. Our return to the ship created a good deal of excitement. One might lay long odds that every man on board had been watching, for all that he was worth, whatever there was to watch, without being able to make head or tail of what he had seen. So that our arrival just gave the final touch to the general curiosity. The things, whose departure those gentlemen on shore were weeping for, were got on board. The great Joss wanted to be hoisted up in his palanquin. When I pointed out that there were obstacles in the way, he came out of it with a rush and shinned up the ship's side like a monkey. His appearance on deck made things lively. The men took him for the devil, and shrank from him as such. Not wanting any more fuss than might be helped, I led the way down the companion as fast as I could. He came after me. Goodness alone knows how. It seemed to me he was as handy on no legs as some people upon two. His daughter followed. I had been turning matters over in my mind coming along. There had never been such a thing as a passenger known on the Flying Scud. At that moment there was a vacant two-berth cabin suited to people who might not be over and above particular. The great Joss and his friend Luke should have it. The great Joss's daughter should have Luke's quarters. When Luke appeared he professed himself agreeable. Indeed, too agreeable. There was an eagerness about the way in which he snatched at my suggestion which made me thoughtful even in that first moment. It was against nature that a man should be half beside himself with delight at the prospect of being berthed with such a monster. As I eyed Luke, noting the satisfaction which he was unable to conceal, I wondered what was at the back of it. However, so things were settled. Mr. Batters and the first mate were placed together. Miss Batters had the first mate's quarters. When I got on deck again, land was out of sight. I was disposed for solitude and a quiet think, but I wasn't to have them. I soon became conscious that Isaac Rudd was taking peeps at me. He kept coming up out of the engine-room, an oily rag in his hand, and a sort of air about him, as if he wondered when I proposed to speak to him. At last I took the hint. "Well, Mr. Rudd, what is it?" He came up, wiping his paws with his oily rag. His manner was sententious. "I thought, sir, that you might have something which you wished to say to me." "About what?" "This little game." "What little game?" "The one we've just been playing. You see, we've all been taking a hand in it, and there's a kind of feeling aboard this ship that there might be something a little delicate about it, which might bring us into trouble before we're done. And no man likes to take a risk for nothing." "I see. That's it. You know me, and you know that I'm as good as my word. You may tell the men from me that if the Venture is brought safely into port, and turns out what I expect, it will be £25 in the pockets of every man on board this ship, and 100 for each officer." "And what for the first engineer?" With that confounded oil rag of his he wiped his scrubby chin. "I'm thinking that, under the circumstances, I shouldn't like to guarantee that the engines'll last out for £100. They're just a lot of bits of iron tied together with scraps of string. To keep them going will mean sleepless nights." I laughed. "Ha! Are they so bad as that? I'm sorry to hear it, Mr. Rudd. Rudd, you're a blackguard. You want to rob your captain, and the owners. Damn the owners. That's against Scripture. An owner's always blessed. He'll never be upon the other side if he sends a ship to sea with such engines as we have. They are a trial, aren't they, Rudd? They're that. So I think we may say that, under the circumstances, if the engines do last out, it will mean £500 in the pocket of the chief engineer." £500? I'm not denying it's an agreeable sum. I'd like to handle it. And it'll be no fault of mine if the machine blows up before it's just convenient. There's just one other question I'd like to put to you. Is it the devil that we've took aboard?" "It's not, but it's something that's seen the devil face to face and tasted of hell fire." Turning on my heel, I left Isaac to make of my words what he could. A variety of matters demanded my immediate consideration. I had pledged my word that every man on board that ship should, in case of a certain eventuality, receive a definite sum of money. The promise was perhaps a rash one, but there was reason behind it. It would have to be kept. Then there were the owners to be considered. And myself. Where were the funds to come from with which to do these things? What would they amount to, leaving fancy figures out? I should have to have a clear understanding with the great Joss. The sooner the better, while I still, as it were, had a pull on him. Isaac Rudd had lost no time. Neither would I. I went down the companion ladder to have that understanding. End of chapter 28. Recording by Xanta. Chapter 29 of The Joss, a Reversion. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Xanta. The Joss, a Reversion, by Richard Marsh. Chapter 29. The Father and His Child. The cabin door was fastened. I rapped. Luke inquired from within, "Who's there?" "I. Open the door." So far as I could judge, no attempt was made to do as I requested. There were whispers instead. The voices were audible, though the words were not. I rapped again. "Do you hear? Open this door." Luke replied, "Begging your pardon, Captain, but Mr. Batters isn't feeling very well. He hopes that you'll excuse him." A louder rapping. "Open this door." There were sounds which suggested that something was being done in a hurry, an exchange of what were apparently expostulatory murmurs. Then the great Joss spoke.
"This is my cabin, Captain Lander."
I cut him short. "Your cabin?" I brought my fist against the door with a bang. "If you don't open at once, I'll have the ship put about, take you back from where you came, and dump you on shore. I'm in command here, and all the cabins in this ship are mine. Now, which is it to be? Open or back?" Luke began to mutter excuses.
"If you'll just wait 5 minutes, Captain."
I felt convinced that they were doing something they didn't wish me to see, and which was highly desirable that I should see. I didn't wait for Luke to finish. I just planted my shoulder against the door and heaved. It leaped open. I had counted on the fastenings being rickety. There was Luke and the great Joss, with their hands full of papers and things which they had evidently just been attempting to conceal. The girl stood looking on. I took off my cap to her. "Miss Batters, I wish to speak to your father in private. Might I ask you to leave us?" She went without a word. I turned to Luke. "Mr. Luke, go up on deck and wait there till I come." There was an ugly look on his face.
"If you don't mind, Captain, I should just like—"
"Do as I tell you, sir, or you cease to be an officer on board this ship." He saw that I meant business, moved towards the door. "You needn't trouble to take those things with you."
"Put them down, you fool!"
growled Mr. Batters. Luke put them down and departed, not looking exactly pretty. When he had gone, pushing the door to, I stood with my back against it. The great Joss and I exchanged glances. He spoke first.
You've a queer way of doing things.
I have, of which fact your presence here is an illustration.
I have not shipped as one of your crew. I'm a passenger.
At present. Whether you continue to be so depends on one or two things. One is that you behave. You come from a place where there are some queer customs.
What do you mean by that?
What I say. He winced in a fashion I did not understand, causing me to surmise that the customs in question might be even queerer than I supposed. The first time, Mr. Batters, you show disrespect for any orders I may give, or wishes I may express, the ship goes round. You go back. I fancy your friends will be glad to receive you back among them. He glared at me with his one eye in a manner I did not altogether relish. There was an uncanniness about his looks, his ways, his every movement. As he confronted me, squatted on the floor, he was the most repulsive-looking object I had ever seen. It was hard to believe that such a creature could be human. And English! The sight of him filled me with a sense of nausea. I hastened to go on. There is another point on which your continuance as a passenger depends. What do you propose to pay for your passage?
I've told you. Halves.
That is too indefinite. I want something more definite. Moreover, it is the rule for passage money to be paid in advance.
If you prefer that way of doing business, you shall have £100 apiece for us, and I'll give you the money now.
Is that all? Then the ship goes round.
You shall have more if you'll only wait.
How long?
Till I've had time to look about me. You can't expect me to have everything cut and dried before I've been on board 10 minutes. You see these things?
I did. They were everywhere. I wondered where Luke and he proposed to sleep.
They're worth £1 million.
Nonsense.
It's not nonsense, you fool!
The opprobrious epithet was seasoned with a profusion of adjectives. Mr. Batters, that is not the way in which to address the commander of a ship. As I see that you and I are not likely to understand each other, I will give instructions to put the ship about at once, and take you back. It's plain I made a mistake in having anything to do with you. I made as if to go.
Stop, you idiot!
Mr. Batters, what did you observe?
I apologize. I apologize. What you say is right. I have been used to rummy ways. I can't slough 'em at sight. Even a snake takes time to change its skin. But when you talk about the value I set on the things I've got here being nonsense, it's you who are mistaken, not me. Look at that!
He held up a hideous-looking image. I took it from him, to find it heavier than I had expected.
That's gold. Solid. Weighs every bit of 20 pounds. 16 ounces to the pound. It's got diamonds for eyes. 25 or 30 carats apiece. Pearls for teeth. And its forehead is studded with opals. The stones in the rings, bracelets and bangles are all real. I tell you, what you're holding in your hands is not worth far short of £50,000.
It may be so. I'm no judge of such things. But what proof have I of the correctness of your statements?
That's it. What proof have you? You've only my word. You may cut my heart out if I'm wrong. And what I say is this. When we get to London, we'll have them all sold, or else valued, whichever you please. You shall either have half the things, toss for first choice, then choose, turn and turn about, or half of whatever they fetch.
You'll give me a written undertaking to that effect?
I will.
And I can take an inventory of everything you have?
If you like.
And remove them to my cabin for safer custody?
If you think that they will be safer there, you can stow 'em in a hold for all I mind. All I want is for them to be safe and have my fair half. Only I don't see what harm they'll do in here, except that you burst it off the lock, which is a thing as can be replaced. I'm not likely to leave the ship, and I'll watch it that they don't go without me.
There seemed reason in what he said. It sounded fair, above board enough. Though every pulse shrunk from his near neighbourhood, crying out that there was that about him which was good neither for man nor beast, I could not but admit to myself that this was so. I was still holding in my hand the obscene image which, according to him, was worth £50,000. I had been watching Mr. Batters. Glancing from him to it, I saw that, perched upon its head, was a little doll-like looking figure, as long perhaps as my middle finger. It was not there a second before. I wondered whence it came, how it retained its place. "What's this?" I asked.
That?
There was a curious something in Mr. Batters' tone which set my nerves all jangling.
Where I've been, they call that the god of fortune. It's my very own god. It watches over me. When you see it, I'm never far away.
I reached out my disengaged hand to take hold of it for examination, but I seemed to have grown dizzy all of a sudden, and clumsy. It must have been because I was clumsy that, instead of grasping it, I knocked it off its perch. It fell to the floor. I stooped to pick it up.
I don't think you'll find it. I expect it's gone.
It did seem to have gone, or perhaps my sudden dizziness prevented my seeing so small an object in the imperfect light. I certainly did feel strangely giddy. So overpowered was I by most unusual sensations that, yielding the £50,000 horror into Mr. Batters' outstretched hand, almost before I knew, I found myself on the other side of the cabin door. I staggered up on deck. The night air did me good. I drew great breaths. The giddiness passed. I began to ask myself what could have caused it. Had Mr. Batters been practising a little hocus-pocus, playing up to the part of the great Joss? If I had been sure, I would have put the ship about right there and then. Back he should have gone, to play the part out to the end. Luke hailed me. "Begging pardon, captain, but may I go below? Mine's the next watch. I should like a wink of sleep." "You may. A word with you before you go. You got me into this business. I'm not sure I thank you. What do you know about this man Batters?" He looked up at the stars as if for an answer to my question. "Him and me was boys together." "And since?" "We've come across each other once or twice, but it's half a lifetime since we met." "You seem to have recognized each other pretty quickly when you did meet." "He knew me. I didn't know him. And never should have done. Never. I can't hardly believe now it's the Ben Batters I used to know. Only he's proved it." "How came he to be what he is?" "That's more than I can say. He hasn't told me no more than he's told you. He always was a hot 'un, Ben was. Bound to get into a mess before he'd done. Always a fightin'. But I never thought he'd have come to this. Fine figure of a man he used to be. They must have took the skin right off him. Used him something cruel." I shuddered at the thought. Better to have died a dozen deaths. "Do you think he's to be trusted?" "Well, as for trusting, that depends. Seems to me no one's to be trusted more than you can help." I felt, as he went, that he had summed up his own philosophy. He trusted no one. It was the part of wisdom for no one to trust him. I wished that, in my haste, I had not berthed the two together. The first excuse which offered, Luke should be shifted. I did not like the notion of such a pair hobnobbing. The stake was too big. Someone touched me on the arm. It was the girl. "Miss Batters, you ought to be in your berth. It's late." Her answer surprised me.
"I'm afraid."
She stood so close that I could hear a little fluttering noise in her throat, as if she found it hard to breathe. I wondered if she was affected by the motion. She did not look as if she were. She was straight as a dart, and beautiful.
"Afraid? Of what?" "Of the water. There is trouble on the sea. Evil spirits live on it."
"You needn't be afraid of evil spirits while you're with me. Who's put such notions into your head? English girls aren't afraid of the sea, and you are English."
"Is it alive?"
"Is what alive?"
"The ship."
"The ship?"
"What makes it go? It rushes through the water. It trembles. I feel it trembling beneath my feet. It makes a noise."
"Those are the engines."
"The engines? Are they alive?"
"Alive? Yes, while Mr. Rudd and his friends keep feeding them, they're alive. Come and have a look at them."
"No, I dare not. I'm afraid."
"There's nothing to be afraid of. This is a steamer. The engines drive it along. Don't you know what a steamer is? Haven't you ever heard of one?" She shook her head. I didn't know what to make of her. Her ignorance was something beyond my experience. Presently she was off on a fresh track.
Is England far?
Pretty well. If we've luck, we shall get there in about a month.
A month? 4 weeks?
I nodded.
I cannot live 4 weeks upon the sea.
She gave what seemed to me to be a gasp of horror. Oh, yes, you can. You'll get to love it before you've done.
Love it? Love the sea? No one ever loves the sea.
Don't they? That's where you're wrong. I do, for one.
My lord!
All in a second, down she flopped upon the deck. I was never so flummoxed in my life. I couldn't think what was wrong. Miss Batters, what is wrong? She turned her lovely face up to me, still on her knees.
Are you the lord of the sea?
The lord of the sea! For goodness sake, get up. The watch will think you're mad, or that I'm threatening to murder you. I had to lift her before she'd move. Then she seemed reluctant to stand upright in my august presence. I tried my best to disabuse her mind of some of her wild notions. I'm a plain sailor-man, I am. I've sailed the sea, boy and man, the best part of my life, east and west, north and south. And though I don't mind owning I like a spell of dry land for a change, it would be strange if I hadn't grown to love it. I'm ready to grumble at it with any man. I'm no more lord of the sea than you are. I'm just captain of this ship, that's all.
You are the captain of this ship.
That's it, Miss Batters.
Why do you call me that?
Call you what?
Miss Batters. I am not Miss Batters. I am Susan.
I had been looking away. When she said that, I looked at her. I wished I hadn't. There was something on her face, in her eyes, which set me all of a flutter. Something had come to me since I had entered those waters. I didn't used to be easily upset. I couldn't make it out at all. I couldn't meet her glance, but looked down, smoothing the deck with the toe of my shoe, not recognizing the sound of my own voice when I heard it. I don't know that I quite care for the name of Susan. I think I prefer Susie.
Susie? What's that?
That? That's the name your friends will call you.
My friends?
She gave another little gasp.
Susie?
To hear her say it.
But I have no friends.
You will have. Heaps.
But I have none now. Not one.
Well, I cleared my throat. I had never been so stuck for a word before. Could have kicked myself for being such a fool. She took my clownishness as implying a reproach. I could tell it from her tone.
No, I have no friend. Not one.
I made another effort. I wasn't lacking as a rule. I couldn't understand what ailed me then. Well, it's early days for me to speak of friendship, since I've only known you for an hour or two, but if I might make so bold, Miss Batters—
Miss Batters!
She stamped her foot, her little bare foot.
I am not Miss Batters. I am Susie.
Her tone had changed with a vengeance, her manner too. She was every inch a queen. A few feet more.
Can I not be Susie to you?
I turned away. I only wanted to get hold of myself. She put my head in such a whirl. But before I had a chance of finding out whereabouts I was, her voice rang out like a boatswain's whistle.
I hate sailor men.
I turned again to stare.
And I hate the sea.
Before I could slip a word in edgeways, she had swung herself around and vanished down the companion ladder. I took off my cap to wipe my forehead. Though the night was cool, my brow was damp with sweat. This is going to be a lively voyage, on my word. I had never said a truer thing since the day that I was born. End of chapter 29. Recording by Xanta. Chapter 30 of The Joss, a Reversion. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Xanta. The Joss, a Reversion, by Richard Marsh. Chapter 30. The Morning's News. It was a lively voyage. Oh, yes, for those who like that kind of liveliness. Everything went wrong, just in the old sweet way. Rudd had to sleep with his engines. As sure as he turned his back on them for 5 consecutive minutes, something happened. I began to wonder if we shouldn't have got on faster if we had had sweeps aboard. You don't often see hands starting to row a steamer along. But anything was better than standing still, or being blown back, which was worse. It was no use rigging a sail against the winds we had, or we might have tried that. But the wind was against us, like everything else. The weather seemed to have cleared on purpose to give us a chance of getting the Great Joss aboard. It broke again directly afterwards. More than once, and more than twice, I wished it hadn't. Then perhaps we shouldn't have been favoured with the company of Mr. Batters. In shipping him we'd shipped a Tartar. I became inclined to the belief that we owed half of our bad luck to him. The crew was dead sure that at his door could be laid the lot of it. They swore he was the devil himself, or his brother. I wasn't sure they were far out. Either what he had gone through had affected his brain, or he was possessed by the spirit of mischief, or there was something uncanny about him. I never knew anything like the tricks he was up to. Weather had no effect on him. As for decent hours, he scorned them. It's my belief that what sleep he had was in the day. I know he was awake pretty well at night. Once I was dragged out of my berth in the middle of the night, because he was frightening the watch out of their senses. When I got on deck I found a heavy sea. Everything sopping. The seas breaking over the scuppers. Pitch darkness. And Mr. Batters up in the tops. The crew were of opinion that he was holding communion with his friends in hell. I shouldn't have been surprised. He looked as if he was at something of the kind. How he kept his place was a wonder. Although he had no legs, he seemed to have a knack of gluing himself to whatever he pleased. Up there he had an illumination all on his own. It must have been visible for miles across the sea. He had smeared himself and everything about him with something shiny, phosphorus or something. He always was playing tricks with stuffs of the kind. It made him look as if he was covered with flames. He was waving his arms and going through an acrobatic performance. Snakes were twining themselves about the illuminated rigging. The old villain had smuggled a heap of them in his palanquin. He lived with them as if they were members of his family. They seemed to regard him as akin. Talk about snake charming. I believe that at a word from him they would have flown at anyone just as certainly as a dog would have done. No wonder the watch didn't altogether relish his proceedings. I sang out, "Come down out of that, Mr. Batters, before there's trouble." I did put a bullet into one of his precious snakes. It was this way. I had a revolver in my hand. The boat gave a lurch. The trigger must have caught my coat sleeve. It snapped. There was a flash. A report. One of his snakes straightened itself out against the blackness like a streaming ribbon. You could see it gleam for a moment. Then it vanished. I suppose it dropped into the sea. A good thing, too. The idea was that it had been hit by that unintentional shot. I can only say that if that was the case it was the victim of something very like a miracle. Old Batters understood what had happened long before I did. He came down that rigging like 10 mad monkeys. And he went for me like 20. If the watch hadn't been there he'd have sent me after that snake. It took the lot of us to get the best of him. If the men had had their way they'd have dropped him overboard. I wished I had let them before I finished. A more artful old dodger never breathed. I drew up the agreement of the spoils, but it was days before I could get him to set his hand to it. At first he pretended he couldn't write. As it happened, I had seen him write. It seemed to me he was always writing. When at last I had induced him to sign, in the presence of Luke, Rudd, and Holly, he eluded me on the subject of the inventory. I could not get one. His stock of excuses was inexhaustible. And they were all so plausible. It is true that I made notes of a good many things without his knowledge, but a formal inventory I never had. As to my suggestion that at least the more valuable things should be removed to my cabin for safe custody, when I renewed it he expressed his willingness on conditions that he went with them and his snakes. I declined. On those terms I preferred that he should remain custodian. Then there was his intimacy with Luke. That continued, in spite of my attempts to stop it. Though they grew slacker when I began to suspect that after all Mr. Luke might not be on such good terms with his boyhood's friend as he perhaps desired. I got my first hint in this direction when, one afternoon, someone was heard bellowing in Mr. Batters' cabin like a bull. I made for it. I found Mr. Luke upon the floor, his friend upon his chest, his friend's hands about his throat. He was not bellowing just then. Mr. Batters had squeezed the grip right out of him. He was purple. In about another minute he would have known what death by strangulation meant. We got his dear friend off him. The dear friend said unkind things about Mr. Luke. By the time we had brought the first mate round he was about as limp a man as you might wish to see. He made one remark, which was unprintable. He turned round in his bunk, where we had laid him, and for all I know he went to sleep. Since, before that, I had taken care to see that he was berthed apart from Mr. Batters, there was nothing to disturb his slumber. After that I did not feel it necessary to keep quite so sharp an eye on the attentions which he paid our passenger. They did not seem to be so friendly as they had been before. As if I hadn't enough to plague me, there was the girl. When I begin to write of her my language becomes mixed, as were my feelings at the time, and there were moments when she got me into such a state that I didn't know if I was standing on my head or heels. She was her father's own child, though it seemed like sacrilege to connect the two. Insubordination wasn't in it along with her. She twisted me round her finger. Except when I stiffened my back and felt like stowing her in the long-boat and cutting it adrift with a bag of biscuit and a can of water. And then, 5 minutes afterwards, I'd feel like suicide for ever having thought of such a thing. She wore me to a shadow. The sea agreed with her far better than I had expected, or she either, especially considering the weather we had. She was all over the boat. All questions, like a child. There was nothing you could tell her enough about. It was extraordinary how the taste for imparting information grew on one. If you didn't explain everything that could be explained, and a good deal that couldn't, it wasn't for want of trying. She had got together a mixed-up lot of facts before she had been upon that vessel long. Because when you begin to look into things you find that there are a good many you think you know all about, till a sharp-witted young woman starts you on to telling her all you do know. Then, before you've time to wriggle, you are stuck. There are men who sooner than get that will say anything. It is bad enough to feel you are making a fool of yourself when the subject is why steamers don't sink when they're floating, or why engines shove them along, or that kind of thing. But when the question's what love is, and you feel but can't tell, it's worse.
Why do you say you love me?
I had mentioned to her casually that I did, being driven clean off my balance before I knew it, though I meant every word I had said, and about 200,000 more, in spite of my having had more trouble with her old villain of a father that very afternoon, and being full of hope that when it came to hanging him I should be there to see. Because I do.
But what is love?
Love? Why, love. It was evening. The wind had been falling away all day. Now it was dead calm, the first we had had since shipping Batters. We were something over 1,200 miles from Aden. There's the exact spot marked on my chart, but I should never forget it if it wasn't. That mark means adjectives. I had had it all out with Batters about our route. The short cut was what he wanted. It was what I wanted too, but what I did not want was to pay the canal dues. In fact, I couldn't. There was not enough money belonging to the ship on board. I hadn't told Batters as much as that, but I had made it clear to him that he would have to pay. So the arrangement stood that we were to come home by Suez, and he was to hand me over the coin to take us through. We should have to coal at Aden. How we had managed so far was beyond my understanding. Rudd was a marvel. He would make a skip of coal go as far as some men would a ton. Stores we had taken in here a little and there a little, living from hand to mouth, but we had bought no coal. I had said to Rudd, "Shall we run into Colombo and have some put into our bunkers there?" He pondered. It was his way to ponder. Then shook his head. "I'm thinking we'll last to Aden. I'm thinking it. And I don't seem to fancy a stop at Colombo with Mr. Batters aboard." I looked to see from his face if his words had any hidden meaning. There seemed to be something behind everything he said, till you grew tired of trying to find out what it was. He was always dropping hints, was Rudd. There appeared to be nothing unusual about his wooden-looking countenance, so I concluded to give his words their dictionary meaning. "If you think we can last to Aden, we will. It will save time, and coal's cheaper there." So it was settled, and now we were heading straight for Aden. The weather had cleared. I had told the girl I loved her. Every vein in my body was on fire because of it. Luke was on the bridge. I felt that in spite of the darkness, and it was pretty dark, as well I remember, his eye was on us as much as on the ship's course. We had been walking up and down for exercise. She was leaning over the taffrail, apparently preparing to enter on a kind of philosophical discussion about what love was.
Is it good to love?
That depends. My tone was grim.
Do I love you?
I should like to hear you say so.
I love you.
I thought that was what she said, but she was leaning so far over, seeming to be watching the smudge of soap-suds we were leaving behind us, that I couldn't quite catch her words, though I was all of a quiver too. What do you say?
I say I love you.
Susie, do you mean it?
I don't know. I don't know what love is. How should I? I'm only a savage. You said so the other day. I want telling things.
You don't want telling what love is?
Do you mean that you don't want to tell me? You never will tell me what I really want to know. I'll ask one of the men. I'll ask Luke. He tells me things.
Susie, Luke's too fond of interfering in matters which are no business of his. He'll get himself into trouble before he's done.
Why?
Don't you dare to ask Luke what love is.
Dare? I dare do anything. I'll go and ask him now.
She'd have been off if I hadn't caught her arm. Susie, don't, for my sake.
Then tell me. Tell me yourself.
Stamp went her foot. It was one of her favourite tricks. Directly she lost patience, down it went. I'll tell you if you'll give me time. I tried to find the words, but couldn't. I held out my arms instead. It's this.
What?
Don't you understand?
What am I to understand?
Don't you understand that I want you to be my wife?
Your wife? Your wife?
She spoke in a crescendo scale, as if I had insulted her.
You said you were my friend.
Don't you understand that I want to be something more than your friend?
You want to beat me, to use me like a dog, to have me burned.
Susie.
My father said in England there were no wives.
No wives in England? He was making fun of you.
He was not making fun of me. He has told me all my life. When I asked him why they burned my mother, he said because she was his wife. He is an Englishman. In England they have no wives.
I had a glimpse of the confusion which was in her mind, but at that moment I was incapable of straightening out the evil. Your father's was a peculiar case. There are wives in England.
Is that true?
She thrust her face close to mine. She was terrifically in earnest. It is perfectly true. They abound.
Then I will not go to England.
But, Susie, you've got hold of the wrong end of the stick. In England a wife's the man's superior.
It's a lie. See how you stammer? You cannot lie like my father, with an even tongue. A wife is her husband's slave. At his bidding she fetches, and she carries. He beats her as he beats his dog. When she grows old, he takes another, and she dies.
My dear Susie, I assure you that description does not apply to England. There, unless she's a wife, a woman isn't happy.
Then in England women are more unhappy than in the country from which I come. I will not go there. I will not go to any place where there are wives.
She strode past me as I stared at her, thunderstruck. I continued thunderstruck when she had gone. She had a great deal to learn. That night I slept badly. In the morning I was roused by someone hammering at the door. "Who's there?"
"It's me, sir. Holly. The cutter's gone."
"What?"
"The cutter's gone, and the watch is hocussed."
I was standing at the door in my nightshirt. "What the devil do you mean? Where's Mr. Luke?"
"He had the morning watch. He's gone too. It's his chaps as is hocussed. Leastways, they're lying on the deck like logs. And Mr. Batters, he's gone. And his things. His cabin's stripped clean. And his daughter, she's gone."
Holly!
I was thrusting myself into a pair of trousers. All of a sudden the ship stopped dead, with an unpleasant shock. "What's that? She can't have struck." I rushed up. Rudd met me. "I have to report to you, sir, that the engine's ceased to work." "Very well. Patch it up and start it again as soon as you can. It's not the first time it's stopped. But I'm thinking it'll be the last. Someone's been playing tricks with the machine. I'm fearing it's Mr. Luke.
End of chapter 30. Recording by Xanta. Chapter 31 of The Joss, a Reversion. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Xanta. The Joss, a Reversion, by Richard Marsh. Chapter 31. The Termination of the Voyage of the Flying Scud. We had been completely done. So completely that it was some time before I was able to realize that I had been diddled quite to that extent. Not a detail had been overlooked. Mr. Batters and Mr. Luke had gone conscientiously to work. They had been thorough. They had left us the ship. That was about all. They would probably have taken that if they had had any use for it. It seemed they hadn't. If I could only have laid hands on that latest thing in freaks, there would have been one Joss less. I would willingly have made a Joss of Luke if I had only had a chance. To have boiled, burned, and skinned him would have been a pleasure. He should not only have been legless, he should have been armless too. As for that girl, who didn't want to go to a place where there were any wives, she should have become acquainted with a climate where there was something less agreeable. That was how I felt towards her at first, but after a while I came to the conclusion that she had been under the domination of her father, hadn't dared to call her soul her own. So anger turned to pity. I would just simply take her to a place where there were wives. I'd let her know what it felt like to be one. That would be punishment enough for her. As for Luke and Batters, what wouldn't I have given for a quiet half-hour with the pair, with boiling oil, branding irons, and everything just handy. Mr. Luke must have stowed pretty well all our eatable stores inside that cutter. As first mate, under peculiar circumstances, I had let him do, in some respects, a good deal as he pleased. He had had the run of the stores. He had not gone far from collaring the lot. It seemed that certain of the hands had noticed him fiddling a good deal with the cutter of late, especially when he had been in charge of either of the night watches. But, of course, they had said nothing to me till it was too late, which was a pity. Mr. Batters had taken with him all the treasures of the temple, those offerings of the faithful, half of which were to have been mine. No wonder he had not been of opinion that they would have been safer in my cabin. And he pledged his word that he would make it his especial business to see that not one of them left the ship until he did. That elegant monster which he valued at £50,000 had gone. Even the palanquin. Oh, it was pretty. Mr. Luke had made everything snug by generously treating the members of the morning watch to a little drink directly they came on duty. That drink was no doubt one of Mr. Batters' concoctions. They remembered no more so soon as they had swallowed it. So for 4 hours Mr. Luke had the deck to himself. No watch was kept. The wheel was lashed. The cutter was filled with the treasures of the temple, then lowered. Goodness and Mr. Luke alone know how. And it must be remembered that Mr. Batters was an ingenious man. It was reported from the engine-room that the order was received to go slow. Probably while the Flying Scud went slow the cutter was cast loose, with Mr. Batters and the girl inside it. Shortly afterwards the order was changed to full steam ahead. The inference seems to be that immediately after giving that order the ingenious Mr. Luke went overboard to join the cutter. And the Flying Scud went full steam ahead, with no one on the lookout. Under the circumstances it was perhaps just as well that the engines did break down. It's an elegant story for the commander of a ship to have to write, especially one with a clean certificate and of sober habits. There we were, without engines, without coal, without stores, without enough cargo to act as ballast, about halfway between Aden and Colombo. We were a mad ship's company. For my own part I felt like cutting any man's throat, including my own. All that day we hung about, doing nothing, except cursing. Towards night, the engines proving hopeless, we rigged a sail. There was just about enough wind to laugh at us, so we let it laugh us along. There was no canal for us.
The man who was to have paid our shot had gone, the shot with him. So we headed for the Cape. The long way round was the only way for us. Engineless, the prospect was inviting. There is no need to speak in detail of the remainder of that voyage, no need at all. In one sense it was over, quite. In another it was only just beginning. I won't say how long it took us to reach home, or what we suffered before we got there, and will only hint that by the time we sighted English waters I felt as if I was a twin brother of Methuselah's. We hadn't walked the entire distance, but we might almost just as well have done. It was evening when I landed. There was a mist in the river. A drizzling rain was falling. Appropriate weather with which to bid us welcome home. The lights of London gleamed dimly through the fog and wet. So soon as I had set foot on land, I saw, coming at me through the uncertain light, the individual who, as he stood with his friends upon that moonlit shore, had cursed us for bearing the great Joss to the ship across the motionless waters of the Gulf of Tonkin. Since that night we had ourselves anathematized someone else for serving us as we had served him. I had only seen him once, and then from some little distance in the moonshine, but there was no possibility of mistaken identity. This was the man. He was dressed in the same fantastic garb, and came at me like a ghost out of Shadowland. He took me by the shoulders, and he cried, as he had done upon that moon-kissed shore, "The great Joss! The great Joss! Give us back the great Joss!" Exactly what took place I cannot say. I was so taken aback by the unexpectedness of the encounter, having never dreamed that I should set eyes upon the man again, that for some moments sheer surprise robbed me of my faculties. Before I was myself again, the man had gone. Others had thrust him from me. Although I rushed here and there among the people who stood about, I could not find him. He had vanished. I had swallowed a good many bitter pills since last I left that wharf. The bitterest was still to come. I had to pay my visit to the owners. On the night of my arrival it was too late to see them. The pleasure was postponed to the morning. It was a pleasure. I came out from their presence a disgraced man, which was no more than I had expected, though it was no easier to bear on that account. The blame was wholly mine. So they would have it. For some of the language which they used to me I found it hard to keep my hands from off them. My tale of the great Joss, and of all that I had hoped to gain for them by that adventure, they received with something more than incredulity. If the thing had resulted as I had hoped, that they would have pocketed their share of the spoils, and betrayed no scruples, I knew them too well to doubt. But because, as I held, through no fault of mine, the affair had miscarried, there was no epithet too opprobrious for them to bestow on me. By their showing I had been guilty of all sorts of crimes of which I had never heard. I had betrayed their trust, smirched their good name, as if in the eyes of those who knew them it could be smirched, been guilty of piracy, acted like a common thief, offended against the law of nations, brought shame on England's mercantile marine. Oh, it was grand to hear them talking. They might have been saints from whose brows I had plucked the halos. They were good enough to explain that it was only because they disbelieved my entire story, and placed no credence in any part of it whatever, that they refrained from handing me over to the properly constituted authorities, to be by them passed on to the Chinese government, to be dealt with as my offences merited. They took me for a jay, and were so kind as to add that they looked upon the tale as a clumsy, dishonest, and disingenuous attempt to draw a red herring across their track. The phrase was theirs, and so prevented them from taking proper and adequate notice of the scandalous neglect of duty, and of their interests, of which, to my lasting shame, I had been guilty. It was a rare wigging that I had, and, to the best of their ability, they included in it everyone who had been with me on board the Flying Scud. There were 4 of us, at least, who swore that we'd be even for it with someone, somehow. Isaac Rudd, Sam Holly, his chum Bill Cox, and I. We were the 4. And all we had to go upon to help us towards getting even was a scrap of paper, half a sheet of common note. It was the only thing Mr. Batters had left behind him. I had found it in a corner of his cabin, crumpled up into a sort of ball, as though he had thrown it there and forgotten all about it. On it this was written: "To my niece, Miss Mary Blythe, care of Messrs. Martin and Branksome, Drapers, Shoreditch." We would look the lady up. Where the niece was, the uncle might not be far away. At least she might have some knowledge of his whereabouts. If she had, we would have it too, or know the reason why. I still had the written undertaking, which he had signed, by which he was to divide with me equally, as a consideration for services rendered, the treasures of the temple. I had handed this to the owners as proof of the truth of my statements. They had thrown it back to me with a sneer, and something worse than a sneer. That act amounted to a renunciation of all interest in any property which the document conveyed, or so it seemed to me. Good. They might smart for their scepticism yet. Let us find the niece, then the uncle. If Miss Blythe could only give us a hint as to where he might be found, though it was on the other side of the world, we'd find him. He had valued his belongings at $1 million. We might be snatched out of the gutter yet. The search began badly. They knew nothing of a Miss Blythe at Messrs. Martin and Brankson's, or so I was informed by an official individual in the counting-house. That was a facer. It looked as if Mr. Batters, at his tricks again, had purposely placed in our way what seemed like a clue to his lair for the sake of having still another game with us. But a night or two afterwards I tackled a young fellow as he was coming out of the shop after closing hours, and put my question to him. He turned it over in his mind before he answered. "There's no Miss Blythe here now, but there was. I believe her name was Mary. I could soon find out. She's left some time. Directly after I came. I can't think where she went. I've heard the name, but I can't remember. I might inquire if you like, and let you know tomorrow night." I agreed. He did inquire. The next night he let me know. Miss Blythe had gone to a big shop which he named at Clapham. The next day, being engaged, I let Rudd go over to Clapham to see what he could do. He made a mess of things. The lady was pointed out to him by one of her fellow assistants. Before he could get within hail of her, she slipped round a corner and was out of sight. Came across her again in a restaurant where she couldn't pay her bill. Paid it for her. Then, as he was about to follow her with a view of pursuing his inquiries, he saw, standing on the pavement in front of the place, the individual who had cursed us on that moonlit shore. The sight of him struck Rudd all of a heap. By the time he recovered his presence of mind, the lady had vanished, and the gentleman too. The juxtaposition of Miss Blythe and that cursing gentleman seemed to suggest that we were on the right track of the retiring Mr. Batters. What is more, that the scent was getting hot. The evening after I called at that Clapham establishment, just as the premises were being closed, and asked to see Miss Blythe. Some jackanapes informed me that the young woman had been dismissed that very day. He didn't know what her address was, but had heard that she had gone off with a party who called himself Frank Payne, and who said he was a lawyer. At that it was my turn to be struck all of a heap. A short time previously I had called upon Mr. Frank Payne, intending to ask his opinion as to the validity of the document which had Mr. Batter's name attached. But somehow the conversation got into other channels. I came away without it. Not by so much as a word had he hinted that he knew anything about Mr. Batters or his niece. As I walked along pondering these things, Rudd, at my side, suddenly exclaimed, "Captain, there she is. That's Miss Blythe, the young lady for whom I paid the bill." He was pointing towards two young women who were advancing in our direction on the opposite side of the road. Having got it clear to which of the pair he referred, I sailed across to meet them. She was Miss Blythe. She admitted as much. But that was all the satisfaction I received. She staggered me with the information that her uncle, Mr. Benjamin Batters, was dead. As I was trying to understand how he had come to his death, and when, and where, she took umbrage at my curiosity, or manner, or something. She and her friend jumped into a hansom cab, which dashed off at the rate of about 20 miles, leaving Rudd and I on the curbstone, staring after it like moonstruck gabbies. End of chapter 31. Recording by Xanta. Chapter 32 of The Joss, a Reversion. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Xanta. The Joss, a Reversion by Richard Marsh. Chapter 32. The little discussion between the several parties. That night we held a consultation, we four. It was getting dead low tide with us. If we didn't light upon those treasures of the temple, we should have to find a ship instead, and that before long, if we had to go aboard of her as cabin boys. It seemed to me that something might be got out of Mr. Paine, in the way of information. Things pointed that way. The more I thought, the more they seemed to point. I told the others. We decided to wait upon him in a body, and man the pumps for all we were worth. If he proved dry, if nothing could be got out of him, then we should have to admit that the tide was low, and that we were stranded. But we had hopes. The morning after we were in Mitre Court, where his rooms were betimes. The idea was that he shouldn't escape us, that we should see him as soon as he was visible, and so play the part of the early bird that catches the worm. But when we found that the door into the street was open, I, knowing the lay of the land, without any parley, led the way upstairs. And it was well for him we did, for we came upon as lively a little scene as ever we'd encountered. There was a larger company assembled than we had expected. Quite what was happening we couldn't at once make out. The first thing I saw was a girl tied down upon a table, and, of all the people in the world, that cursing gentleman leaning over her with a knife in his hand. Having torn her clothes open at the throat, he looked as if he was going to write his name on her nice white skin with the point of his blade. He got no farther than the start. I introduced myself, and landed him one. He didn't seem to know whether he was glad or sorry to meet me. I loosed the girl. When I looked round I saw the room was in a mess, and on the floor, trussed like a fowl, was Mr. Paine. But what made me almost jump out of skin for joy was the sight of our dear friend Luke tied up beside him. I released that excellent first officer. Then things were said. When he understood that we were spoiling to cut him into little pieces, and that it seemed likely that he had fallen from the frying pan into the fire, he explained. What we wanted to know was the present address at which Mr. Batters could be found. It seemed, according to him, that he was aching to know it too. Bless my beautiful eyes! He spat upon the floor. Do you think, if I knew where the hearty was, that I'd be here? He used me shameful, he did that. It seems incredible that he should have used you badly, Mr. Luke. It does, after all I'd done for him. But he did. After we... He coughed. I finished his sentence. Had taken such a ceremonious leave of us all on board the Flying Scud. Yes, go on. We got picked up by a liner as was making Suez. As you anticipated you would be. I see. You're a far-sighted person, Mr. Luke. They landed us at Suez. We stopped there 2 or 3 days getting packing cases to pack the treasures of the temple in. They must have been rather conspicuous objects to carry about with you anyhow. Go on. Then hang me if one evening I didn't wake up and find that I'd been senseless for close on 2 days. The devil had hocused me. Hocused you? Impossible. He had. Then he'd slipped away, him and his blessed daughter, while I was more dead than alive, leaving me with as good as nothing in my pockets. What I had to go through no one knows. If I ever do set eyes on him again, I'll... The peroration was a study of adjectives. Then it appears that you are just as eager to have another interview with Mr. Benjamin Batters as we are. I am sorry your venture was not attended with better fortune. It deserved success. Pray, what were you to have had out of it? I was to have had half the blooming lot, and the girl... And the girl? Indeed, and the girl. Mr. Luke, I should dearly like... Mr. Paine interposed. Excuse me, Captain Lander, but if it is of Mr. Benjamin Batters you are speaking, if it is to him so many mysterious references have been made as the great Joss, then I may state that, to the best of my knowledge and belief, that gentleman is dead. Dead? To the best of your knowledge and belief? What do you mean? As I stared at him, a remark was made by the young lady, who so narrowly escaped being made the subject of an experiment in carving. Although evidently very far from being as much herself as she might have been, she had pulled herself together a little, and was holding both hands up to her throat. You're forgetting that Polly's lying perhaps worse than dead in Camford Street. Mr. Paine gave a jump. I had forgotten it, upon my honour. What's that? I asked. Miss Blythe, to whom Miss Purvis refers as Polly, is the niece of the Mr. Batters of whom we have been speaking. She's his heiress, in fact." "His heiress?" "Yes, his sole residuary legatee. Among other things, he left her a house in Camford Street, number 84, on somewhat mysterious conditions. For instance, she was to allow no man to enter it." "No man?" "No, only she and one feminine friend were ever to be allowed to put their feet inside the door." "Oh?" I began to smell a rat. Mr. Paine waved his hand towards the young lady the cursing gentleman had been about to practise on.
"This is Miss Purvis, the feminine friend whom Miss Blythe chose to be her sole companion."
Other conditions were attached to the bequest equally mysterious. Indeed, it would really seem as if there was something in that house in Camford Street, the existence of which the late Mr. Batters was particularly anxious should be concealed from the world. Miss Blythe only entered on the occupation of her property yesterday. Yet Miss Purvis came at an early hour this morning to tell me that something extraordinary had happened in the middle of the night. Something, she doesn't quite know what, but fancies it was some wild animal, made a savage attack upon Miss Blythe without the slightest provocation. And when Miss Purvis recovered from the shock which the occurrence gave her, she found that she herself had been thrown into the street. Mr. Paine," I laid my hand upon the lawyer's shoulder, "do you know what's inside that house?"
"I haven't the faintest notion. How should I have?"
"It's the late Mr. Batters."
"The late Mr. Batters?"
The thing the existence of which Mr. Batters was most anxious to keep concealed was Mr. Batters himself, for reasons. So he's put about a cock and bull story, making out he's dead, and then hidden himself in this house of which you're talking.
Captain Lander."
Mind, it's only my guess, as yet, but I don't think you'll find that I'm sailing very wide of the wind. The more I turn things over, after listening to what you've said, the more likely it seems to me that the great Joss, whom we've all been on tiptoe to get a peep at, has hidden himself in that house which he pretends to have left to his niece, and is waiting there for us to find him. And I'm off to do it." "Someone's had the start of you." The interruption came from Rudd. The absence of the cursing gentleman and his two friends explained his meaning.
"They've gone hot foot after him," I cried.
"What's good enough for them is good enough for me."
We journeyed in 3 cabs. Speed was a consideration, so we chartered hansoms. I went in front with Luke. He didn't seem over and above anxious for my society, but I didn't feel as if I could be comfortable without him. So we went together. Though I am bound to admit that I'm inclined to think that I enjoyed that ride more than he did. Rudd, Holly, and his chum came next. Mr. Paine and the young lady last. I liked his manner towards that young lady. In a lawyer whom one naturally looks upon as the most hard-hearted of human creatures, it was beautiful. He could not have treated her more tenderly if she had been a queen. And, though she was still in a very sad condition, I have a sort of idea that, when they were once inside that cab, speed with them wasn't much of a consideration. And though those hansoms did rattle us along in style, we found that someone had got to that house in Camford Street in front of us. End of chapter 32. Recording by Xanta. Chapter 33 of The Joss, a Reversion. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Xanta. The Joss, a Reversion, by Richard Marsh. Chapter 33. In the Presence. The cursing gentleman and his two friends were awaiting us upon the pavement. I said a word of a kind to the long 'un. "Look here, my bald-headed friend, I don't quite know who you are or what you want, but I've seen enough of your little ways to know they're funny. So if you take my advice you'll make yourself scarce before there's trouble." He held out his hands, looking, on the dirty pavement of that shabby street, like a fish out of water.
"The great Joss, the great Joss, he is in there. Give him back to us, then we go."
I reflected. After all, there was some reason in the creature. He was almost as much interested in Mr. Batters as I was. Considering how Mr. Batters had treated me, I didn't see why he shouldn't learn what an object of interest he really was. It might occasion him agreeable surprise. The fellow was in such dead earnest. It beat me how he and his friends had got where they were. Reminding me of the flocks of migratory birds which one meets far out at sea. Goodness only knows by what instinct they pursue the objects of their search. I turned to Mr. Paine. This gentleman was high priest, or something of the kind, in the temple in which Mr. Batters was number one god. Number one god? That's about the size of it. He was a god when I first made his acquaintance. This gentleman's own particular. Since he and his friends have come a good many thousand miles to get another peep at him, I don't think there'll be much harm in letting him have one, if it's to be got. So far as I'm concerned, Right Reverend Sir, you can stop and see the fun. Mr. Paine stared. He didn't understand. The look with which he regarded the foreign gentleman wasn't friendly. The experience he had had of his peculiar methods was a trifle recent. Perhaps it rankled. I turned my attention to the house, in front of which the lot of us were standing, cabs and all. The question is, since no one seems inclined to open the door, how are we going to get in to enable us to pay our little morning call? Rudd practically suggested one way by hurling himself against the door as if he had been a battering ram. He might as well have tried his luck against a stone wall. As much impression would have been made. When I ran my stick over it, it sounded to me like a sheet of metal. Luke proffered his opinion. You'll want a long chisel for this job, or a pair. Nothing else will do it. That door's been put there to keep people out, not to let 'em in. It'll be like breaking into a strong room. Luke proved right. All our efforts were unavailing. That door had been built to keep folks out. "If this is going to be a case for chisels," said Rudd, "we'd better start on it at once, before those police come interfering." We were already centres of attraction to a rapidly increasing crowd. Our goings-on provided entertainment of a kind they didn't care to miss. Long before we had put that job through, the police did come. What is more, we were glad to see them. Rudd fetched a pair of crowbars from an ironmonger's shop close by. With his assistance, and acting under his instructions, we started to shift that door. We never got beyond the starting. We might as well have tried to shift the monument. He rigged up contrivances, tried dodges. There was the door just as tight as ever. And just as we were thinking of breaking the heads of some of the members of that interested crowd, up the police did come. Mr. Paine explained to them what we were after. Then he and the young lady and Rudd went off with one of them to the station, while another stayed behind. In course of time they returned, together with an inspector, 3 more policemen, and 2 specimens of the British working man, who were wheeling something on a barrow. The interest of the crowd increased. The new arrivals were received with cheers. Those workmen, in conjunction with Isaac Rudd, fitted up a machine upon the pavement. It was some kind of a drill, I believe. Presently not one but half a dozen holes had been cut right through that door. Into these were inserted crowbars of a different construction to those we had been using. We all lent a hand, and the door was open. The crowd pressed forward. "Keep back!" cried the inspector, and the police kept them back. The inspector entered, with the young lady, Mr. Paine, Rudd, and I. The rest were kept out, including the cursing gentleman and his 2 friends, which seemed hard on them after all they must have gone through. But it was little that they lost, at the beginning anyhow. For as soon as we set foot inside the passage, we found that there was another door defying us. It seemed to lead into a room upon our left. Rudd called one of the workmen in to consult with him. They sounded the door. They sounded the wall, and concluded that the shortest way into the room was through the wall. So soon the house was being knocked to pieces before our eyes. There was sheet iron on the other side of that wall, but they were through it in what seemed no time. And there was a great hole, large enough to admit of the passage of a man. And on the other side of this hole stood Susie. She stared at us, and we stared at her, neither understanding who the other was. But when I did understand, I felt as if my legs were giving way, and something inside me set up a clamour which was deafening. And when she saw it was me, she called out, "Max!" She was through that wall like a flash of lightning. I had her in my arms almost before I knew it. "Susie," I said, "my sweet." I could tell by the way of her that she knew more about wives than she did when I saw her last, and that she had grown reconciled to the idea of being one. And perhaps a bit more than reconciled. The fates be thanked. Miss Blythe was in the room with her, alive and sound, and, indeed, unhurt. They had been frightened out of their wits when they heard us, and at the noise we made, thinking they were going to be murdered at the least. "Where's your father?" I asked.
"When he brought her in," she answered, meaning Miss Blythe, "he went out, shutting the door behind him, taking the key. He left us prisoners. We've been prisoners ever since. We've heard and seen nothing of him. Where he is I don't know, unless he's above."
He was above, in a room at the top of the house, with another door to it, so that we had to get through the wall again. He had had a sort of throne rigged up, intending maybe to have an imitation of the one which he had occupied when I had first come upon him in the temple. If that was so, the imitation was a precious poor one. But he was on it, dead, and cold. He had been gone some hours. Whether he had committed suicide, or whether the end had come to him in the ordinary course of nature, there was nothing to show. A colony of snakes was in the room, those favourites of his. One shared the throne with the great Joss. It was on the seat in front of him, where his legs ought to have been. My idea was that the thing had killed him, but it seemed that that was not the case. The creatures were declared not to be venomous, and there was no mark of a snake bite about him anyhow. While we stood looking at the throne and what was on it, there was a movement behind. The cursing gentleman and his two friends came in. At sight of the great Joss they threw themselves on their faces and bit the floor. I never saw men so scared, or so surprised. I had a sort of notion that they had supposed him to be immortal, and that he couldn't die. When the body came to be examined, and it was discovered what a torso it really was, and to what prolonged and hideous tortures the man must have been subjected, one began to understand that they might have had reasons of their own for thinking so. It might very well have been incomprehensible to them why, if he could die, he had not died. At the foot of the throne was the little doll-like thing which I had seen perched on the head of the 50,000-pound monstrosity. He had called it the God of Fortune, saying that where it was he was not far away. The case seemed to present an illustration of the truth of his words. The doll was broken to atoms. The great Joss and the God of Fortune seemed to have come to an end together. End of chapter 33. Recording by Xanta.
Chapter 34 of The Joss, a Reversion. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Mark Thornton, Miranda, New Zealand. The Joss, a Reversion by Richard Marsh. Chapter 34. Author's Postscript. How matters stand today. I should have preferred that the close of Captain Max Lander's statement should have been the conclusion of this strange history. But for the satisfaction of any reader who may desire to know what became of A, B, C, or D, these following lines are added. What have been described by Captain Lander as the treasures of the temple were found in the house in Camford Street, so far as could be ascertained, intact. The question of ownership involved a nice legal problem. The native attendants of the temple vanished almost as soon as they appeared. No one knew where they went to. Nothing has been seen or heard of them since. It seemed, therefore, that they put forward no claims. There remained the girl, Susan, presumably the dead man's daughter, though there was no legal proof of the fact. Mary Blythe, who had claims under her uncle's will, Captain Lander, who held the document entitling him to half a share, and the owners and crew of the Flying Scud. All these had claims which required consideration. In the end, by great good fortune, an amicable settlement was arrived at, which gave satisfaction to all parties concerned. As might have been expected, the value set on the property by Mr. Batters proved to be an exaggeration. It was worth nothing like £1 million. Still, it fetched a considerable amount when realized, and after the owners and crew of the Flying Scud had been appeased, excepting Mr. Luke, who was markedly dissatisfied because he only received an ordinary seaman's share, an appreciable sum remained as surplus. To this was added the cash which had been bequeathed to Miss Blythe by the will, whose validity was at best extremely doubtful, the whole being divided in equal portions between the niece and the daughter. As Miss Batters immediately afterwards became Mrs. Max Lander, the commander of the Flying Scud had no cause to be discontented with this arrangement. Number 84 Camford Street is still without an owner. It appears, from the story told by the girl Susan, that on reaching England her father hurried her from place to place, seldom stopping for more than 2 or 3 days under one roof. They seem to have made their most lengthy stay in a barge in one of the lower reaches of the river. No doubt the notion of concealment was present to his mind from the first, though how he lighted on the house in Camford Street is still a mystery, nor has anything transpired to show by whose orders it was fortified in such ingenious and elaborate fashion, nor by whom the work was executed. Nothing has been found which goes to show that he had any right to call the house his property. Its actual ownership still goes begging. The document purporting to be a will was possibly drawn up by his own hand. The letter signed Arthur Leonard Missionary, pretending to announce his death on that far-off Australian island, was probably concocted at his instigation by one of the miscellaneous acquaintances whom he picked up during his wanderings among the riverside vagabonds. From such a one he might have acquired Mr. Payne's name, together with some sidelights on that gentleman's character. Miss Batters made it abundantly clear that her father was the freak to whom Mr. Payne was of service by rescuing him from the too curious crowd in the Commercial Road. His exact object in making his will has never been shown. No doubt the man's brain was in disorder. He was actuated, perhaps, by 3 considerations: the desire for concealment, the consciousness that he and his daughter would fare very badly if shut up in a house alone together, the wish to avail himself of his niece's services. To have gone to her with a straightforward tale would have been in accord neither with his character or policy. He had lived too long in what, for civility's sake, may be called a diplomatic atmosphere, to be able to breathe in any other. Also, he knew nothing of his niece, suspected that she knew nothing good of him, was moved possibly by a very natural unwillingness to make himself or his story known to her until he had learned what kind of person she was. So he invented his own death, making her his heiress for the sole purpose of getting her inside the house. It is impossible to say what might have happened had she proved amenable to his wishes, and events moved along the road which he had laid down for them. The presumption is that sooner or later, probably sooner, he would have made himself known to her and endeavoured to purchase her fidelity and services on terms of his own. As it is, the uncle is the constant theme of the niece's conversation. Miss Blythe is now Mrs. Cooper. The Coopers are residents of one of the smaller south coast watering places, where they are regarded as leading lights among local social circles. Mr. Cooper is a vice-president of the boat club, yacht club, swimming club, cricket club, football club, and so on. His wife is the mother of an increasing family and a lady with a tail. Its subject is Uncle Benjamin. That gentleman lived a life of strange and varied adventure. His history loses none of its marvels at his niece's lips, either because they are a trifle tired of the theme, or are merely jealous. Some of the more frequent hearers have been heard to doubt if there ever was an Uncle Benjamin. If these doubts are serious, they do the lady less than justice. Mr. and Mrs. Lander are also happy. One would be reluctant to doubt it. Yet, at the same time, one cannot refuse to admit that there are occasions when the outward and visible signs of their happiness take a somewhat boisterous shape. He has a temper. She has a temper. There are moments when it would appear as if there was hardly room for the 2 tempers in a single house. Since they seldom remain in one place for more than 3 months, they can scarcely be said to live anywhere. In selecting their next abiding place, they seem to act on the principle of letting it be as far from the present as possible. Mr. Lander has not pursued his profession since the last eventful voyage which he has herein set forth. Possibly by way of killing time, he is apt to be a trifle too convivial. Nothing makes Mrs. Lander more indignant than an even hinted doubt of her positive assertion, made in and out of season, that every drop of blood in her veins is English. As her complexion is a little dusky, her aggressive attitude upon this point makes her rather a difficult person to get on with. Mr. Frank Payne, oddly enough, has married Miss Purvis, and, what is perhaps still more odd, theirs is the happiest match of the three. About their complete and absolute content with their condition there can be no possible doubt whatever. He worships her, she worships him. If there is any finer recipe for matrimonial happiness than that, it has not come in the present writer's way. His practice as a solicitor has grown large. Mrs. Payne is of opinion that he is rightly regarded with even fulsome reverence by the entire bench and bar. Since he would not dream of contesting any opinion which happened to be his wife's, the position of affairs could not possibly be improved. Mr. Benjamin Batters lies in Kensal Green Cemetery, in a deep grave and in a full-sized coffin, surrounded by dignitaries and respectabilities. In his coffin were placed the broken pieces of the curiosity which he called the God of Fortune. So they are still together. A handsome monument has been raised above him. There is no hint in the inscription that below are but the mangled fragments of what was once a human body, or any reference to the fact that he ever posed as a joss, or a god, or was ever believed, even by savages, to have put on immortality before his time. It simply says, "Beneath this stone reposes Benjamin Batters, who, after a life of varied adventure in different parts of the world, sleeps well." We will hope that it is so. The end. End of chapter 34. Reading by Mark Thornton, Miranda, New Zealand. End of the Joss, a Reversion, by Richard Marsh.